Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back in time to a place where the concept of a comfort food would get you laughed out of the city-state and possibly whipped for being soft. We're heading to ancient Sparta. This isn't the glorious, cinematic, slow-motion fighting Sparta you might be thinking of. No, we're going to the dinner table. We're going to explore a society that deliberately weaponized its cuisine, making it as bland and disgusting as possible to forge the ultimate warriors. Honestly, if you're a foodie, you probably wouldn't survive the first meal. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really helps the channel find other people like you, who enjoy drifting off to the strange corners of history. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments what city you're listening from, and what time it is there. It's always cool to see how this little community spans the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in a valley, cradled by the imposing peaks of the Tagetes Mountains. The wind that sweeps down from them has a bite to it, a chill that seems to seep right into your bones. This is Laconia, your home. The air doesn't smell of baking bread or fragrant olive oil like it might in Athens. It smells of damp earth, wood smoke, and something metallic, like discipline itself. This is the essence of Lacedaemon, the true name for the Spartan state. From your earliest moments of awareness, you've been taught a fundamental truth: comfort is a disease. Pleasure is a poison that weakens the spirit, softens the muscle, and rots a civilization from the inside out. You see it in the way your father looks at a finely crafted pot from Corinth, not with admiration, but with a flicker of suspicion. You hear it in the way the elders dismiss the complex music of Ionia as decadent noise. Everything beautiful, everything luxurious, is a potential crack in the wall of Spartan resolve. This philosophy is the bedrock of your entire world. It's an unwritten constitution, more powerful than any law carved in stone. You are a Spartan. You are not meant for a life of ease. You are a tool forged for a single purpose: the defense and glory of the state. Every aspect of your life, from the clothes you wear, a simple tunic, regardless of the season, to the words you speak, brief, to the point. What others will one day call laconic is designed to chip away at individual vanity and reinforce the collective will. The elders tell stories of the great Agoge, like Agoge, who laid down these rules centuries ago to save Sparta from the grip of greed and inequality. He is a ghost who haunts every corner of your life. It was like Agoge, they say, who established the systems that govern you. It was he who understood that a warrior who fears a hard bed and a plain meal will surely fear an enemy's spear. And so, your bed is a simple plank, and your meals, well, we'll get to your meals soon enough. One of the most peculiar manifestations of this ideology is how you handle money. You've seen traders from other cities, their pouches jingling with small, neat coins of silver and gold. In Sparta, such things are forbidden. Your currency is cumbersome. It consists of long, heavy iron rods, treated in a vinegar bath to make them brittle and worthless as actual iron. They are called pelano rs. To buy something of value, you do need a wagon to haul your money around. The system is deliberately impractical. It makes hoarding wealth difficult, bribery almost impossible, and theft a logistical nightmare. It's a physical representation of Sparta's contempt for commerce and the luxury it brings. This is a mainstream historical fact. By the way, this bizarre form of currency designed to enforce simplicity. But here is where things get a little hazy, a point of contention that whispers through the halls of history. This entire rigid system is attributed to Lycurgus. But did he truly exist? Was he one man, a divinely inspired genius who revolutionized his society in a single generation, or is he a myth, a legendary figure created later to give divine authority to a set of traditions that evolved over time? Some historians argue he was a real person, while others are convinced he is a composite of several reformers, or perhaps just a convenient name to stamp onto the Spartan way of life. The academic world is still in a quiet, polite tug of war over the man who supposedly designed your suffering. For you, however, it doesn't matter if he was real or not. The system is real. The cold wind is real. The gnawing expectation in your stomach is real. You are 7 years old. You've spent your life up to this point in the care of your mother, learning the foundational myths and the absolute value of courage. But that is about to end. You look up at the mountains, and you know that tomorrow, you will be taken from your home. Tomorrow, your true education, your transformation into a Spartan, begins, and it starts not in a classroom, but in a barracks. The morning arrives not with a gentle dawn, but with a sharp, grey light that cuts across the valley floor. There are no long goodbyes. Your mother looks at you, her face as stoic and unreadable as a stone carving. She doesn't hug you or weep. Such displays are for the weak, for the Athenians, for people who have the luxury of emotion. She simply adjusts the thin, crimson-dyed cloak the Phoenike is on your shoulders. Her hands are firm, practical. Her final words to you are not "I love you," but a quiet, fierce command that is the unofficial motto of every Spartan mother: come back with your shield, or on it. It means return a victor, or return a corpse carried home on your shield. There is no honorable alternative. A stern-faced elder, a man whose wrinkles seem carved by a chisel, arrives to collect you and a few other boys from the neighborhood. You are now the property of the state. You march, not looking back, towards a cluster of long, no-slung buildings on the edge of town. This is the Agoge. It is not a school. The word itself means the rearing or the leading. It is a 13-year-long crucible designed to burn away your individuality and recast you as a cog in the perfect Spartan war machine. The moment you step through the gates, the world shrinks. The air inside the barracks is thick with the smell of sweat, unwashed bodies, and cold stone. There are no decorations, no comforts, just rows of hard-packed earth floors where you're expected to sleep. You are immediately stripped of your name and herded into a group of about 60 boys your age. This group is called an ageler, which literally translates to a herd of animals. You are no longer the son of your father, you are a creature of the pack. Your new life is governed by a strict hierarchy. The boys a few years older than you have absolute authority. At the very top of your small world is a 20-year-old, a youth chosen for his intelligence, courage, and, most importantly, his capacity for disciplined cruelty. He is the Iron, the prefect of your unit. He is your judge, your mentor, and your tormentor. His word is law. He can, and will, punish you for any perceived infraction, a moment of hesitation, a flicker of fear, a complaint about the cool. This is the core of the Spartan education. You learn obedience to your superiors, how to endure hardship without complaint, and how to command those beneath you. It's a mainstream, well-documented system. From the age of 7 until you are 20, this is your family. You will eat, sleep, train, and bleed with these boys. The state trusts this system so completely that even the 2 kings of Sparta are required to send their sons here. The only exception being the eldest son, who is the designated heir. Overseeing the entire Agoge is a magistrate called the paid onomos, or boy herder. He is a figure of immense prestige and terror, a man who has proven his worth on the battlefield and in civic life. He carries a whip, and he is not afraid to use it not just on the boys, but on the IRNS and even on your own parents if they dare to interfere or show you any unspartan softness. His job is not to educate you in letters or philosophy, but to forge you. Your first task is a perfect example of this philosophy. You are told to make your bed, but you are given no blankets, no mattress. Instead, you are sent to the banks of the river. You are TIS and instructed to gather reeds. You must snap them off with your bare hands, as knives are forbidden for such tasks. The reeds are sharp, and your hands, still soft from childhood, are quickly covered in small, stinging cuts. You carry the bundle back, your arms aching, and pile them on the floor. This will be your bed for the year. In the winter, you'll be allowed to add thistle down to the pile. A small concession to the biting cold, but one you have to earn. Here's a small, curious detail about your new life. The older boys are actively encouraged to pick fights amongst the younger ones. Diren will watch, his arms crossed, as two of you wrestle or box until one submits. HES not watching for entertainment. HES assessing. Who is strong, who is clever, who gives up too easily, who fights dirty but effectively. It's a constant, brutal addition for survival and status within the herd. This culture of controlled violence is designed to make you fearless and accustomed to pain. But there is a murkier side to this system, a topic that modern historians handle with great care and ongoing debate. The bond between an Iren and the younger boys in his charge was intense. Sources like the ancient writer Plutarch describe it as a form of mentorship, where the older youth was responsible for the younger boy's moral and martial development, acting almost like a substitute father and role model. This official relationship was a cornerstone of the Agoge. However, the true nature of these bonds is heavily debated. Some scholars argue they were often pederastic, a formalized relationship that was common in other parts of ancient Greece, while others believe Sparta's unique, austere culture would have restricted such practices to a purely platonic, educational role. The surviving evidence is scant and often written by outsiders who either romanticized or condemned Spartan society. The reality of what happened in the cold, dark barracks between the older mentors and their young charges is one of those historical questions that remains shrouded in ambiguity. As night falls, there is no one to tuck you in. You lie on your pile of sharp reeds. The thing cloaked your only protection against the damp chill rising from the earth. Around you in the darkness, you can hear the sniffles of other boys, quickly silenced by a sharp word from an older peer. The pain in your hands is a dull throb. The hunger in your belly is a tight knot. You are 7 years old, and you have 13 more years of this ahead of you. The forging has begun. The sound that wakes you isn't a gentle call, but the sharp crack of a whip against a stone pillar, a signal that echoes through the cold air of the barracks. Before the sun has even thought about rising, you and the other boys are on your feet, your bodies stiff from the hard, reedy bed. There's no time for grogginess. Hesitation is weakness, and weakness is punished. The day's training begins immediately. Running, wrestling, and drills designed to build a tolerance for pain that would seem inhuman to an outsider. After hours of this grueling exertion, a new kind of discipline begins. You are marched, as a single, silent unit, towards another long, functional building. This is the SYS Citium, or as it's more commonly known, the Fiditium. This is the public mess hall, the place where you will take every meal for the rest of your life as a Spartan citizen. The word Fiditian is believed to come from a root meaning frugality or sparingness, which should give you a pretty good hint about the dining experience you're about to have. As you approach, you see adult men, full-fledged warriors, filing in. These are the men you are being trained to become. Their faces are hard, weathered by sun and war. They move with an economy of motion, a quiet confidence that borders on arrogance. They are the Spartiates, their elite, and this mess hall is their club, their fortress, and their dining room all rolled into one. Gaining entry into one of these dining groups is the final test of your Agoge training. If, at age 20, you are not elected into a mess, you will be denied full citizenship. Your entire youth is a long, arduous application process for a seat at this table. You and your herd are led to a designated area, separate from the men but within sight and earshot. The room is stark, just like the barracks. Long wooden benches and tables are arranged in a severe, orderly fashion. There is no art on the walls. No music. No laughter. The atmosphere is not convivial, it is institutional, like a prison cafeteria. This is intentional. The mess hall is an extension of the barracks, another tool for enforcing discipline. The men are divided into groups of about 15. Each group is a SYS Citium, a brotherhood forged in battle. They eat together, they fight together, and they hold each other accountable. To be a member is to be part of an unbreakable bond. You watch as they take their seats. Their movements synchronized and silent. There is a quiet ritual to it all. This communal dining system is one of the most famous aspects of Spartan life. A core tenet established by the legendary Lycurgus. The goal was to eliminate social distinctions based on wealth. In Athens, a rich man could host a lavish symposium, showing off his fortune with exotic foods and expensive wines. In Sparta, everyone, from the kings down to the newest warrior, ate the same ration in the same bare-bones hall. It was the great equalizer. In theory, a king sat on the same hard bench and ate the same meager meal as the man next to him. This created a powerful sense of egalitarian brotherhood among the elite warrior class. Now for a slightly strange, but historically documented, part of the process. At the start of the meal, an attendant comes around to each man holding a large bowl of soft bread dough. Each member of the mess takes a piece of this dough and, without a word, throws it into a basin carried by a steward. This is the vote. If a member wants to bring a new candidate, a young man like you who has just graduated from the Agoge into their mess, they will have to face this silent ballot. At the end of the meal, the steward will turn the basin upside down. If even a single piece of dough has been squeezed or flattened, a sign of a no vote, the candidate is rejected. The vote must be unanimous. The pressure to conform, to be accepted, is immense. You and the other boys don't get to vote. Of course, you are here to serve and to learn. You watch as the helots, the enslaved population of Sparta, bring in the food. They are the descendants of the people the Spartans conquered when they first took this land. They outnumber the Spartan citizens by a vast margin, a fact that contributes to Sparta's deep-seated paranoia and the brutal need for a permanent military state. The helots work the land, they do the labor, and they cook the food. Their movements are quick, their eyes downcast, careful not to draw the attention of their masters. Historians still debate the precise level of day-to-day tension between the Spartiates and the helots. Was it a constant state of simmering rebellion, as some ancient sources suggest, or was the system so brutally effective that resistance was sporadic and quickly crushed, leading to a kind of normalized, resentful coexistence? The Spartans, who famously wrote very little down, have left us with a one-sided, militaristic view. The voices of the helots are lost to history, so we are left to piece together the truth from the archaeological record and the biased accounts of outsiders. It's a historical puzzle where the most important pieces are missing. An older boy, one of your Irenes, motions for your group to sit. You find a place on a rough-hewn bench. You are silent, watchful. You can feel the eyes of the men on you, assessing, judging. The air is thick with unspoken rules and expectations. A clay bowl is placed before you. It's heavy, utilitarian. You look inside, but it's too dark to see clearly. You can only smell it. A sharp, vinegary, and faintly metallic odor that makes your empty stomach clench in a way that isn't entirely hunger. This is it. Your first meal in the great Spartan mess hall. You sit there, back straight, hands in your lap, waiting. The first rule of mess hall is that you don't touch your food until the elders do. The room is filled with the quiet, rhythmic sounds of men preparing to eat, the scrape of a clay cup on the wooden table, the low murmur of a necessary question. This isn't a place for chatter. Conversation is kept to a minimum, and when it happens, it's supposed to be educational or tactical. The men might discuss a recent battle, critique a young warrior's performance in training, or pose a philosophical question about courage or duty. Your Iran leans in, his voice a low hiss meant only for your group of boys. Watch the men, he says. Do as they do. Ask no questions. Make no sound. You are here to be invisible. An attendant places a small, hard cake next to your bowl. This is moza, the staple bread of your world. It's not the fluffy, leavened bread you might find in a baker's stall in another city. It is a simple, dense cake made from barley paste, sometimes lightly baked, sometimes just dried. It is fuel, nothing more. Its purpose is to be a vehicle for whatever else you are given, or simply to fill the void in your stomach. Then comes the wine. A steward moves down the line, pouring a dark red liquid into your cup, but he doesn't fill it. He pours a small amount of wine, then adds a much larger amount of water. This is a crucial Spartan lesson. They believed that only barbarians drank their wine undiluted. To drink wine straight was a sign of excess, a lack of self-control. A true Spartan was master of his appetites, not a slave to them. They famously would force helots to drink undiluted wine and then display them in the mess halls, stumbling and incoherent. As a living lesson to you and the other boys on the shame and foolishness of drunkenness. You are taught to drink for hydration and ritual, never for intoxication. Finally, your attention returns to the bowl in front of you. A portion of the main course is ladled into it. It's a dark, almost black, liquid with chunks of something floating in it. The smell hits you again, stronger now. It's acrid and sour, with an undercurrent of something coppery. This, you know from the hushed and fearful stories of the older boys, is Melas, the black broth, the legendary, infamous heart of Spartan cuisine. The food you eat is not your own. This is a fundamental concept of the Spartan. Every adult citizen is required by law to contribute a monthly quota of provisions to his mess hall. This is a mainstream historical fact known as the Kaleros system. Each man was granted a plot of state-owned land, which was worked by helot families. From this land, he had to produce his share a specific amount of barley, wine, cheese, and figs. A small amount of money was also required for the purchase of meat or fish. If a citizen failed to make his contribution, whether due to a bad harvest or poor management, he would lose his seat in the mess. And to lose your seat was to lose your citizenship. It was a humiliating fall from grace, turning a full-fledged warrior into a social outcast known as a hypomion, or an inferior. Your right to eat here is directly tied to your civic duty. Now for a slightly less known, almost comical detail about the dining rules. The elders at the table often used food as a tool for teaching. They would deliberately pose tricky or morally ambiguous questions to the boys. What is the most virtuous action a man can take, or why is a short, sharp sword better than a long one? If your answer was clever and concise, embodying the Spartan ideal of laconic, well, you might be rewarded with an extra piece of meat from the elder's own portion. But if you stammered, or gave a foolish or long-winded answer, you would be ignored, or worse, quietly bitten on the thumb by the elder as a form of silent, humiliating correction. It was a high-stakes intellectual game played with food and mild physical punishment. The exact nature of conversation at these meals, however, is a subject of some academic debate. The writer Plutarch, our main source for many of these details, wrote centuries after Sparta's prime. He portrayed the Spartan as a sort of sober, philosophical school, where boys learned wisdom from their elders. But other, earlier sources, like Xenophon, who had first-hand experience with Spartans, described the meals as being more relaxed, allowing for jokes and light-hearted conversation after the serious business was done. So which was every meal a grim, educational ordeal, as Plutarch suggests, or was there room for the kind of camaraderie and banter you'd expect from a group of soldiers? Historians continue to sift through the limited evidence, trying to decide whether the Spartan mess hall was a place of constant testing or a place where warriors could, in their own uniquely austere way, unwind. You look down at your bowl. The men have begun to eat. They dip their barley cakes into the black liquid and eat with a stoic indifference. It's your turn. Your hand trembles slightly as you pick up the hard moza. You dip a corner into the broth. The black liquid soaks into it, turning the pale barley a sickly dark color. You raise it to your mouth. The smell is overwhelming. You close your eyes. This is not a meal. This is a test. And it's a test you will have to pass every single day. Before the black broth touches your lips, your mind races, flooded with all the stories you've ever heard about it. This isn't just soup, it's a legend. a punchline whispered in the marketplaces of Athens and the luxurious dining rooms of Corinth. It's the symbol of everything the rest of the Greek world finds both terrifying and ridiculous about Sparta. You remember an older boy, one of the ironists, telling his story with a grim smile. He spoke of a man from Sybaris, a city in southern Italy so famous for its wealth and luxury that the word Sybaritic still means a love of extravagant pleasure. This Sybarite was curious about the Spartans' legendary bravery and managed to get an invitation to a meal in a mess hall. Just like this one, he sat on the hard bench, watched the strange rituals, and was served a bowl of Melas Zomos. He took one mouthful. He gagged. He spat it out. Later, the story goes, he told his friends, "Now I understand why the Spartans do not fear death." That joke has echoed across the centuries. It's a testament to how really legendary repulsive this dish was considered by anyone not raised on it from childhood. Foreign dignitaries, traders, and emissaries who had the misfortune of being offered Spartan hospitality would return home with tales of this culinary horror, spreading its infamous reputation throughout the ancient world. The men at your table eat it without flinching, their faces impassive. Is it an act, or have they genuinely grown so accustomed to it that they no longer notice its taste? You watch them, trying to find a flicker of disgust, a single sign of weakness. But you see nothing. They chew their barley cakes soaked in the stuff as if it were honey. This performance of indifference is part of the meal, part of the discipline. To show revulsion would be to admit that pleasure and disgust still have power over you. It would be un-Spartan. The broth itself is a subject of endless speculation outside of Sparta's closed borders. What could possibly go into a soup to make it so vile in Athens? They probably imagine it's made from boiled leather straps and mud from the river Eurotas. The mystery surrounding its recipe only adds to its mystique. It's not just food, it's a piece of psychological warfare. The knowledge that Spartan warriors willingly consume this stuff every day is unsettling to their enemies. It suggests a level of toughness and self-denial that is difficult to comprehend for a culture that values art, comfort, and good food. This use of food as a social and military statement is a well-established historical concept. The Romans had their simple soldiers' porridge, pose, to distinguish them from the decadent Greeks. Throughout history, ascetic groups, from monks to revolutionaries, have used deliberately plain or restricted diets to signify their purity and rejection of a corrupt mainstream society. The Spartan black broth is perhaps the most extreme and famous example of this food as ideology, served in a bowl. Now for a strange little detail about Spartan food lore. While the black broth was the star of the show, the second most famous dish from Laconia was a type of hare sausage known as Laconiko skull. Oddly enough, this sausage was actually considered a delicacy in other parts of Greece. Cooks in Athens would try to replicate the recipe, so it wasn't that Spartans were incapable of making decent food, they were just, for the most part, forbidden from doing so in their daily lives. This sausage was likely a rare treat, perhaps made from the spoils of a hunt. A brief and delicious respite from the tyranny of the broth. It's a reminder that even in the most austere culture, the desire for something that actually tastes good can't be completely extinguished. But here we run into a major historical debate: how much of the black broth's reputation was reality, and how much was propaganda. Historians are divided. Some argue that the tales were likely exaggerated by snooty Athenians who looked down on the raw, uncultured Spartans. Perhaps the broth was just a simple, unremarkable peasant soup porked with blood for thickening, and its fearsome reputation was a myth that both the Spartans and their enemies found useful to perpetuate. Others maintain that the accounts are too consistent and widespread to be pure invention. They believe it really was that bad, and that its awfulness was a point of pride for the Spartans. Was it a genuinely disgusting concoction? Or was it just ancient fruity snobbery? We have no surviving recipe. No archaeological remains of the soup itself, so we can't know for sure. The true taste of Melas Zomos is lost to history, leaving us with only its formidable legend. You look from the impassive faces of the warriors to the dark, swirling liquid in your own bowl. The stories and the legends are one thing, The reality is now just inches from your mouth. The other boys in your group are watching you out of the corners of their eyes, just as you are watching them. It's a silent, collective dare. Who will be the first to break? Who will hesitate? The smell alone is a challenge. It's the smell of your future, the smell of duty, of hardship, of being a Spartan. You tighten your grip on the piece of mosa. There is no turning back. You have to eat it. You have to become one of them. Let's pause for a moment, right before that fateful bite, and become culinary detectives. What, exactly, are you about to put in your mouth? The precise, authenticated recipe for Spartan black broth is one of history's lost secrets, probably for the best. No Spartan never thought to write it down, likely because they didn't use recipes. It was peasant food, made from memory and available ingredients. But thanks to the horrified or morbidly curious accounts of non-Spartan writers, most notably the Greek biographer Plutarch, we can piece together a fairly confident, and frankly unsettling, list of ingredients. The base of the broth, its very soul, was pork. But this wasn't prime, tenderloin pork. This was the cheap stuff. The leftovers. The primary ingredient was boiled pig's legs and hocks. These are cuts full of bone, cartilage, and connective tissue. When boiled for a long time, the collagen breaks down and creates a thick, gelatinous stock. It's the sort of ingredient that, in other cultures, would be used to add body to a stew. But here, it's the main event. So picture a pot of water, bubbling away with the least desirable parts of a pig. Next, and most importantly, comes the blood, pig's blood. This was the key ingredient that gave the broth its signature dark, almost black, color and its name, Melas. The blood would have been added as a thickener, much like a French chef might use a roux of flour and butter, or a cook might use egg yolks to enrich a sauce. As the blood cooks, it coagulates, turning the watery stock into a thicker, more substantial soup. It would also impart a strong, metallic, irony flavor. Blood soup is not unique to Sparta. Of course, many cultures around the world have their own versions, from Poland's cuisine to the Filipino dinuguan. But the Spartan version seems to have lacked the spices and flavorings that make those other dishes palatable. The final two ingredients were salt and vinegar. Salt was a straightforward seasoning, a basic necessity. But the vinegar was crucial. A large amount of strong wine vinegar was added to the mix. Why? From a culinary perspective, it served a very important purpose. The sharp acidity of the vinegar would cut through the richness of the pork fattened. More critically, it would prevent the pig's blood from coagulating too quickly or clumping together. It would keep the broth. Well, broth, why? But it would also have given the soup an intensely sour, acrid taste that, when combined with the salty, metallic flavor of the blood and the porky essence of the hocks, created the legendary flavor profile that made a grand cigarette weep. So let's assemble it in our minds. A pot of pig parts, boiled to oblivion, a healthy dose of blood, stirred in to create a dark, thick consistency, a lot of salt, and a powerful punch of sour vinegar. That's it. No onions, no garlic, no fragrant herbs like thyme or oregano that grew wild on the hillsides of Greece. No pepper, no spices from the east. The absence of these aromatic ingredients was just as important as the presence of the others. It was a dish stripped of all potential for pleasure. This reconstruction is the mainstream historical consensus on what went into the broth. Here's a small, related tidbit that highlights the Spartan mindset. They had a specific type of cup they drank from, known as a kothon. It was a practical, military-style cup, but it had a clever design. The lip was turned inwards, which helped to trap any sediment or impurities in the water or wine you were drinking. It was especially useful on a military campaign where the water source might be muddy. Plutarch notes that this cup was also excellently adapted to the black broth. It would help hide the unappealing color from the drinker's view and, he speculates, the inward curving lip would catch the larger, more unpleasant chunks of meat, preventing them from sliding into your mouth. So they actually developed specialized dinnerware to make consuming their terrible food slightly less terrible. It's a marvel of practical, unfoodie engineering. Despite the general agreement on the core ingredients, the exact preparation remains a point of scholarly contention. Was the pork pre-cooked? Was the blood fresh or preserved? What was the ratio of vinegar to blood? These questions are where historians become forensic chefs, debating the finer points. Some argue that the broth might have been a form of early food preservation. The high salt and vinegar content would have made it last longer without refrigeration. A useful quality for a military state. A large batch could be made and kept for a few days. Others propose that maybe, just maybe, there was a secret ingredient we don't know about. Something that made it slightly more tolerable to the Spartan palate. Perhaps a local herb, or a specific type of salt without a definitive recipe. We are left to speculate. The academic debate here isn't about if it was bad, but about the specific technical details of its badness. So now you know. You know about the boiled hocks, the blood, the salt, and the vinegar. You understand that this isn't just a random assortment of ingredients, it's a carefully constructed symbol. It is a lesson in a bowl. Every mouthful is a rejection of luxury. Every swallow is an acceptance of hardship. It's designed to be unforgettable, for all the wrong reasons. And that piece of barley cake, soaked in this very concoction, is still waiting in your hand. The moment of truth has arrived. You lift the piece of soggy masa to your lips. The smell is the first assault. It's a complex wave of soreness from the vinegar and a heavy, coppery scent from the blood, all layered over a base note of boiled animal. It's not the smell of food, it's the smell of a butcher's back room. You close your eyes. A futile attempt to shut out one of your senses. You can feel the eyes of the other boys, and worse, the distant, indifferent gaze of the men. Showing hesitation is not an option. You take a bite. The first sensation is the texture. The barley cake, already dense and gritty, has absorbed the broth and become a pulpy, heavy mass. It's lukewarm. Then the flavor hits. It's not a single taste, but a chaotic sequence of them. First, a powerful, aggressive wave of sour vinegar that makes your tongue tingle and the back of your jaw ache. It's immediately followed by a wave of salt meat that burns slightly. And then, the aftertaste begins to bloom a distinct, irony, metallic flavor that coats your entire mouth. It's the blood. It lingers. You can feel a gag reflex rising in your throat. A desperate, primal rejection from your body. You force yourself to chew, your mind screaming. You try to swallow, but your throat seems to have closed up. The mushy bread and broth stick to the roof of your mouth. You have to consciously command your muscles to work. You swallow. It goes down like a stone, leaving a trail of sour, metallic unpleasantness. Your stomach, already clenched from hunger and nerves, lurches in protest. You fight to keep your face as blank and passive as the warriors you are trying to emulate. You open your eyes and dare to look at the boy next to you. His face is pale, his knuckles white where he grips his own piece of mozza. He is going through the same ordeal. In that moment, the joke about the Sybarite visitor ceases to be a story. It becomes a profound truth. You understand it completely. If this is what you have to look forward to every single day of your life, then the chaos and uncertainty of the battlefield suddenly seem a little less terrifying. Death in a hail of arrows clean, quicken compared to a lifetime of this. This is the mainstream understanding of the broth's psychological impact. It wasn't just about discipline, it was about recalibrating your definition of suffering. By making daily life so unpleasant, it lowered the bar for what was considered hardship. It made you fearless by making your life fundamentally unenjoyable. Now, here's a curious little detail that most people don't think about. What did you drink with this water? Well, heavily watered down wine. Think about that pairing for a second. The tannins in the red wine, even diluted, would likely clash horribly with the irony taste of the blood, creating an even more astringent, mouth-puckering sensation. And water would do nothing to wash away the greasy, metallic coating left in your mouth. There was no refreshing beverage to cleanse the palate. Every part of the meal was designed to be part of the same monotonous, unpleasant experience. There was no escape. You are expected to finish everything in your bowl. Waste is unthinkable. It would be an insult to the state that provides for you and to the men who contributed their share. You mechanically dip another piece of the hard barley cake into the black liquid, and then another. Each bite is a battle. You focus on the rhythm, on the simple mechanical act of dipping, chewing, and swallowing. You try to disconnect your mind from what your senses are telling you. This is the true meaning of Spartan discipline. It's not about being strong when you feel strong. It's about being strong when every fiber of your being is telling you to quit. The historical accuracy of this first taste experience is, of course, open to interpretation. Did every Spartan boy truly have such a visceral, negative reaction? This is where a subtle academic debate lies. Some historians argue that, as with many strong-tasting foods around the world like fermented fish sauce or very ripe cheeses, it was likely an acquired taste. A boy raised in a world where this was the ultimate symbol of manhood and normality might not have found it as repulsive as an outsider would. His palate and his psychology would have been conditioned from birth to accept it. Perhaps the disgust was a learned response for outsiders. While for you, a young Spartan, the feeling was more complex, a mixture of fear, pride, and grim acceptance. The idea that it was universally unphysically disgusting to everyone, even the Spartans themselves, might be another layer of the legend. We project our own culinary standards onto them. But maybe, just maybe, they genuinely got used to it, or even found a strange, savory satisfaction in its powerful flavors. You manage to choke down the last of your portion. Your bowl is empty. Your stomach feels like it's filled with acid and lead. You fought a battle and won, but you feel no triumph, only a hollow sense of survival. You look up and see that the men have finished. Too. They rise from the benches in unison. The meal is over. It probably lasted no more than 15 or 20 minutes. It was efficient, silent, and brutal. You have survived your first encounter with the black broth. You have taken your first real step towards becoming a Spartan. And the worst part is, you know you will have to do it all over again tomorrow. As you march out of the mess hall, the foul taste of the broth still lingering in your mouth like a ghost, you begin to grasp a deeper truth. The black broth isn't about nutrition. It isn't even really about food. It's a philosophical statement served hot. Or, more likely, lukewarm. It's the most direct and visceral way for the Spartan state to instill its core values into you, literally forcing you to internalize them. Every day, that bowl of black soup teaches you the same lesson: reject pleasure. The rest of the Greek world, especially the Athenians, were chasing it. They wrote poetry about it, sculpted beautiful bodies to celebrate it, and refined their cuisine to perfect it. For them, a good life was a pleasant life. Sparta looked at that and saw weakness. They saw a path to corruption, softness, and eventual collapse. Your leaders believe that the man who needs a delicious meal to be content is a man who can be broken by a plain one. A man who needs a soft bed will be useless after a week of sleeping on the hard ground during a campaign. The black broth is the antithesis of everything Athens holds dear. It is deliberately ugly, deliberately unrefined, and deliberately punishing to the senses. By forcing you to eat it, to accept it, and to show no disgust, the state is training your mind. It's a form of daily meditation on the virtue of austerity. You are learning to separate your physical sensations from your sense of duty. My tongue may find this unpleasant, but my will is stronger than my tongue. My stomach may churn, but my spirit is unshakable. This is the inner monologue the broth is designed to cultivate. This ideological function of the food is a mainstream interpretation agreed upon by most classicists. You start to see how this philosophy extends to everything around you. The clothes you wear are a simple, coarse tunic, regardless of wealth or status. Your hair is kept long, a tradition for Spartan warriors. but it's not styled or perfumed. Your speech is clipped and to the point. Every detail of your life is an exercise in stripping away the non-essential, the decorative, the pleasurable. The broth is just the most memorable part of this all-encompassing ideology. Now for a slightly strange, but telling, detail about the Spartan worldview. They didn't just dislike luxury, they were suspicious of highly skilled craftsmanship in general, especially if it was purely for aesthetic purposes. A story told by Plutarch illustrates this perfectly. One day, a Spartan saw a piece of wood being expertly shaped and planed by a carpenter using a sophisticated tool. Instead of being impressed by the man's skill, the Spartan asked him, "If the wood were straight, to begin with, would you not be making it straight?" This wasn't a stupid question. It was a philosophical jab. The Spartan was implying that the carpenter was wasting his time on something that should have been simple and functional from the start. It reveals a mindset that sees elegance and refinement not as a virtue, but as a needless complication, the deviation from a more natural, rugged state. This same logic applies to their food. Why waste time with spices and complex techniques to make food taste good? Food is fuel. Its natural state is simple. Complicating it is a sign of decadence. This brings us to a point of historical debate. Was this system, this whole austere lifestyle, genuinely born from a philosophical choice, as the Spartans themselves claimed through the legend of Lycurgus, or was it born of necessity and later glorified with a philosophical backstory? Sparta is located in a landlocked, relatively infertile valley. It wasn't a major trading hub like Corinth or Athens. They didn't have easy access to the exotic goods, spices, and culinary influences of the wider Mediterranean. Some historians argue that the Spartan austerity was, at its root, simply the reality of their limited resources. Their diet was plain because their land was plain. Their currency was iron because they lacked silver mines. Over time, this economic reality was spun into a virtuous ideology of choice. They took their poverty and rebranded it as discipline. Others maintained that the choice was real. Sparta was not a pure state. Their military dominance brought them considerable wealth in the form of tribute from other city-states. They chose to live this way, enforcing it with strict laws. The debate boils down to a classic chicken or egg question: did the philosophy create the lifestyle? Or did the lifestyle create the philosophy? The truth is likely a complex mix of both. As you walk back to the training grounds, the midday sun beginning to warm the earth, you feel a strange sense of clarity. The meal was an ordeal, but it had a purpose. It wasn't just a random act of cruelty. It was a lesson. It was your teachers, the elders, the ghost of Lycurgus, and the state itself, all speaking to you through that disgusting bowl of soup. The message was simple: you are different. You are a Spartan. You are being forged in a fire of hardship. And this broth is just another lick of the flame. It's burning away your softness, your desire for comfort, your very individuality. And what will be left, they hope, is a man of iron, ready to live and die for the state. A man who doesn't fear death because his daily lunch is, in its own way, a small taste of hell. The immediate effect of your meal or lack thereof is a hollow ache in your stomach. The black broth and the small barley cake did little to quell the gnawing hunger that is now your constant companion. And this, you quickly learn, is entirely by design. In the Agoge, you are deliberately, systematically, underfed. The rations you are given in the mess hall are officially sanctioned to be insufficient for a growing, physically active boy. This institutionalized hunger serves several purposes in your training. The first is purely physical. A body that is lean, almost to the point of emaciation, is believed to be faster and more agile. The elders would say that it makes you grow taller and more handsome. A strange piece of Spartan logic that equated leniencies with aesthetic and martial perfection. There was a belief that overfeeding a boy would make him sluggish and broad, rather than taut and weary like a proper warrior. You are being sculpted by starvation. The second purpose is psychological. Constant hunger is a distraction. It's a low-grade, persistent form of suffering. learning to function, to train, to fight, and to think clearly while your body is screaming for food is a powerful form of mental conditioning. It teaches you to master your own physical instincts. If you can ignore the primal urge of hunger, you can surely ignore the fear of an enemy's charge or the pain of a minor wound. It's another layer of the same philosophy. You taste it in the black broth, master your body, or it will master you. This policy of deliberate underfeeding is a well-documented aspect of the Agoge, mentioned by ancient writers like Xenophon and Plutarch. You feel it during your afternoon drills. While you practice throwing the javelin, your arm feels lighter, weaker than you dare like. While you run, a dizzy spell might flash across your vision. Your mind is constantly aware of the empty, aching void in your gut, but you push it down. You see the other boys doing the same, their faces tight with concentration and effort. To complain would be the ultimate sin. It would earn you a flogging and, worse, the contempt of your peers and your iron. So you remain silent, and the hunger becomes a low, background hum to your existence. This leads to a very strange, and very famous, part of your education, because your official rations are not enough. You are given another option. You are encouraged to steal food. This isn't a secret or rebellious act. It's an unofficial part of the curriculum. The state, in its paradoxical wisdom, starves you with one hand and implicitly tells you to become a thief with the other. This brings us to a peculiar detail of Spartan ethics. The act of stealing itself was not considered a crime. In fact, it was seen as a valuable skill for a future soldier. A warrior on campaign would need to know how to forage, to raid enemy supplies, to live off the land with cunning and stealth. So, learning how to steal a loaf of bread from a baker or some cheese from a farmer's storehouse was practical, hands-on training for future military operations. It taught you how to be resourceful, clever, and silent. However, there was a very important catch. Getting caught was a disgrace. If you were caught in the act of stealing, you would be punished severely. The punishment wasn't for the theft itself, but for your incompetence. You were whipped, not for being a thief, but for being a bad thief. This turned the simple, desperate need for food into a high-stakes training exercise. Every stolen fig, every snatched piece of cheese, was a small victory. Every time you were caught, it was a painful, humiliating lesson in the importance of stealth and planning. The academic world is still fascinated by this bizarre ethical framework. Was it truly as clear-cut as our ancient sources presented? Historians debate the social implications of this system. Did it create a society of paranoid farmers, constantly guarding their food from roving gangs of hungry state-sponsored children? How did the adult population view this practice? Did they see it as their civic duty to be victims in this training program? The ancient sources, written by elites, focus on the educational benefit for the boys, but they are largely silent on the experience of the poor helot farmer who had his precious chickens stolen. It's a classic example of history being written by the powerful, leaving the daily struggles of the common person in the shadows. We are left to wonder about the friction and resentment this state-sanctioned thievery must have caused. So your days take on a new, dangerous rhythm. By day, you are a disciplined soldier in training, enduring hunger with a stoic face. By night, you might become a shadow. You and a few others from your herd might slip out of the barracks, silent as ghosts, to scout a nearby farmstead. Your senses become razor sharp. You learn to listen for the bark of a dog, to read the patterns of the moon, to move across a field without rustling the crops. The gnawing hunger in your belly becomes a motivator, a driving force that sharpens your mind and pushes you to take calculated risks. The world outside the Agoge becomes a landscape of opportunity and danger. A vineyard is not just a vineyard, it's a potential source of grapes, guarded by a watchman. A storehouse is not just a building, it's a fortress to be infiltrated. You are learning the art of logistics, of risk assessment, of infiltration and exfiltration. You are learning to be a soldier, not in drills with wooden swords, but in a real-world game where the prize is a full stomach and the penalty is the stinging lash of a whip. This is the Spartan way. Even hunger is a tool, another instrument to shape you into the weapon the state requires. The hunger is a constant, low-level ache, a fire in your belly that the watery broth and hard barley cake do little to extinguish. It makes you light-headed during drills and haunts your dreams at night. You Irene, the 20-year-old prefect in charge of your herd, sees this. He doesn't offer sympathy. He offers a challenge. One evening, he gathers your group in the dim light of the barracks. The state does not give you enough, he says, his voice slow and conspiratorial. This is a test. The state wants to see who is clever, who is bold. A wolf that waits for food to be thrown to it will starve. A wolf that hunts survives. His eyes scan your faces, thin and pale in the gloom. There are farms. There are kitchens. There is food. But there are also dogs, and watchmen, and helots who will raise an alarm. Your lesson is not to starve. Your lesson is to eat. But you must not be caught. This is your official, unofficial permission. Stealing, or KLAPTE, is now part of your education. It's presented as a rite of passage, a necessary skill for a warrior who must one day live off the land in enemy territory. The logic is simple and brutal. A soldier must be cunning, resourceful, and audacious. What better way to teach these virtues than by forcing a hungry boy to risk a beating for a piece of cheese? You and your comrades begin to plan. This isn't a chaotic free-for-all. It's a calculated operation. You start small. A few boys create a distraction on one side of a farm, drawing the attention of the farmer or his dogs, while another boy, swift and silent, slips into the larder to grab whatever he can. You learn to work as a team, relying on signals and trust. You are not just stealing food, you are conducting a miniature military raid. The targets are varied. The most tempting are the private kitchens of the wealthier Spartiates, where the helot cooks might be preparing something slightly better for the master's family. But these are also the most dangerous, the most heavily guarded. Easier targets are the outlying farms belonging to your family's caleros, the plot of land assigned to a Spartan citizen. These are worked by helots who live in a state of perpetual fear and subjugation. Stealing from them is easier, and the consequences if a helot catches you are less severe than if a fellow Spartan does. This reality reinforces the rigid social hierarchy of your world from a very young age. This practice of encouraging theft is a widely cited aspect of the Agoge. It was a system designed to weed out the slow, the clumsy, and the foolish. The successful thief was praised for his Agoge, his good conduct and skill. He brought back food to share with his messmates, earning him status and respect within the group. He demonstrated the Spartan virtues of stealth, daring, and self-reliance. Here's a curious detail that adds another layer to this strange custom. The most prestigious thing a boy could steal was not bread or cheese, but a live fox. Why a fox? Because a fox is cunning, fast, and notoriously difficult to catch. To successfully capture one and sneak it back into the barracks was the ultimate display of a boy's skill. The famous story, recounted by Plutarch, tells of a boy who had stolen a live fox and hidden it under his tunic. When he was unexpectedly confronted by some elders, he stood his ground and answered their questions calmly. Oh, the rail! The terrified fox was crying and biting at his stomach under the cloth. The boy endured the agony without flinching, so determined not to reveal his theft and the incompetence it would imply. According to the story, he held his composure until the fox literally disemboweled him, and he dropped dead at the elder's feet, having chosen death over the disgrace of being discovered. This story, whether true or an exaggerated moral tale, perfectly encapsulates the Spartan mindset. The pain was irrelevant. The crime was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was not getting caught. However, the ethics and practicalities of this system are a point of contention for modern historians. The traditional view, taken from ancient sources like Xenophon, presents this as a formal, accepted part of the training. But how did it really work? Did the adult Spartans simply turn a blind eye? Was there a season for stealing? Or was it a year-round activity? Some scholars suggest that the practice might have been more ritualized than the stories let on. Perhaps it was confined to specific times or specific targets, becoming a kind of city-wide game with known rules. Others argue that it was likely far more chaotic and brutal, a genuine free-for-all that pitted starving, desperate boys against an oppressed and resentful population of helots. The glowing accounts of its educational value come from the perspective of the elite. We have no record of how it felt to be the farmer whose meager winter stores were constantly being raided by the children of his masters. The true social cost of this bishukka remains a debated and shadowy area of Spartan history. Tonight, your target is a small storehouse on a farm a mile from the barracks. You and two other boys move through the darkness, your bare feet making no sound on the packed earth. The hunger is a sharp, motivating force. You can almost taste the cheese, the dried figs you hope to find inside. But you can also feel the phantom sting of the whip on your back. The risk is immense, but the potential reward of full belly, just for one night, is worth it. This is your classroom. This is your final exam. And it's a test you take over and over again. The night is moonless, a perfect cloak of darkness. You and your small team have reached the targeted storehouse. One boy, acting as a lookout, melts into the shadows of an old olive tree. Another is tasked with creating a diversion if needed. You are the infiltrator. Your heart pounds a rhythm that is a mixture of fear and adrenaline-fueled excitement. The hunger inside you has sharpened your senses to a fine point. Every creak of a floorboard, every distant bark of a door, is magnified. You approach the small wooden door of the storehouse. It's held shut by a simple leather latch. Your fingers, though numbed from the cold night air, work it open with painstaking slowness. The sound is barely a whisper. You slip inside. The air is cool and smells of earth, dried fruit, and a faint, enticing aroma of aging cheese. It's the smell of victory. Your eyes adjust to the deep gloom. You can make out shaped sacks of grain, baskets of figs, and, on a high shelf, a wheel of hard goat cheese. That's the prize. It's more than enough for you and your messmates to have a rare, satisfying meal. You reach up, your fingers brushing against the rough rind of the cheese. And then, it happens. A flicker of light under the door. A heavy footstep outside. Your blood runs cold. You froze for a fraction of a second too long. Before you can react, the door is thrown open, and a large figure stands silhouetted against the night sky, holding a lantern. It's not a helot. It's an adult Spartiate, one of the Agoge instructors, patrolling the area. You've been caught. The walk back to the barracks is the longest of your life. You are not yelled at. There is no lecture. There is only a heavy, damning silence. Your comrades, who were not caught themselves, are marched back with you, sharing in your shame. The next morning, the entire Agoge is assembled. You and another boy, who was caught trying to steal chickens from a different farm, are brought to the center of the square. The Zomos, the boy herder, in charge of the entire institution, stands before you. He doesn't look angry. He looks disappointed, which is somehow worse. They were hungry, the Zomos announces to the assembled boys, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. Hunger is a good motivator. It should make you sharp. It should make you invisible. For these two, it only made them clumsy. He turns to you. You are not punished for wanting food. You are punished for failing to get it. You have brought shame upon your herd and upon yourselves. Then comes the punishment. This is not a hidden or private affair. It is a public spectacle, a lesson for everyone. You are tied to a post. An Iren steps forward with a whip made of thin, flexible branches. The punishment is a ritual flogging. This is a core, historically documented part of your life in the Agoge. Whippings were common, for infractions big and small. But this one is different. This is for failure. The first lash cuts across your bare back, and a fiery line of pain erupts. You bite down hard on your lip, tasting blood. You must not cry out. You must not show pain. That is the unwritten rule. The physical agony is only part of the punishment. The true test is enduring it with stoic silence. You fix your eyes on a crack in the stone wall in front of you, focusing all your will on that single point, trying to transport your mind away from your body. Lash after lash falls, each one a fresh wave of fire. The other boys watch in dead silence. They are learning. They see the price of incompetence. Now, here is a bizarre and disturbing detail of Spartan culture. There was a religious ritual that took place every year at the altar of a goddess named Artemis or Thea. In this ceremony, young boys were brought to the altar and flogged, sometimes with extreme brutality. It was a formal contest, and the winner was the boy who could endure the most lashes without crying out or fainting. It was a public festival, and adult Spartans, including the boys' parents, would come to watch, cheering them on. It was seen as a sacred test of endurance, an offering of the boys' pain to the goddess. This ritual, known as the Agoge, was so famous that in later Roman times, it became a bloody tourist attraction. This wasn't a punishment for a crime, it was a celebrated religious and civic event. It shows how deeply the ideal of enduring pain was woven into the fabric of Spartan society. The flogging finally ends. You are cut down. Your back a raw, bleeding mess. You are not offered any medical attention. You are expected to deal with it yourself. You stumble back to your place in the ranks, your body screaming in protest, but your face a mask of indifference. You have failed the test of stealth, but now you must pass the test of endurance. The debate among historians here is subtle but important. Were these frequent? Brutal punishments truly effective in creating superior soldiers, as the Spartans believed, or did they just create traumatized, brutal men? Some scholars argue that this system was a highly effective, yet horrifying, method of building unparalleled unit cohesion and mental toughness. The shared hardship, the public nature of the punishments, and the extreme pressure to conform created soldiers who would follow any order without question. Others contend that it was counterproductive, stamping out creativity and independent thought, and creating men who were little more than unthinking cogs in a military machine. They argue that this brutalization is precisely why Sparta, despite its military prowess, ultimately failed to adapt to a changing world and faded into obscurity. Was it a forge for heroes or a factory for automatons? The answer is likely somewhere in the grey area between. You spend the rest of the day in a haze of pain. The other boys don't speak to you about it. There is no sympathy. There is only the quiet understanding of the rules. You were clumsy. You were caught. You were punished. The lesson is simple and seared into your flesh: do better next time. Or better yet, don't get caught. Weeks turn into months, and months into years. The rhythm of your life in the Agoge becomes a relentless, predictable cycle of training, hardship, and hunger. The shock of the black broth has faded into a dull, daily reality. The fear of the whip has been replaced by a hardened vigilance. You are becoming a Spartan. Your diet, the very fuel for this transformation, remains brutally simple. The infamous black broth is the centerpiece, the dish that gets all the attention from outsiders. But the rest of your daily food intake is just as important in its sheer, soul-crushing monotony. If the black broth is the symbol of Spartan discipline, the rest of the menu is the substance of it. Aside from the broth, your plate, or more accurately, your bowl, is dominated by three core items: barley, cheese, and figs. This is the holy trinity of the Spartan larder, the foundation of your physical existence. This simple, limited diet is a well-documented historical fact. It was cheap. It could be produced locally in the plains of Laconia, and it provided the basic calories needed to keep a soldier functioning. Barley is the king. You eat it in its most basic form, as the horde, dense mosa cakes served at every meal. These are your bread. They are used to scoop up the broth or eaten on their own. Sometimes, the barley is made into a simple porridge, the rull, Gritty mush that does little more than fill your stomach on a cold morning. Wheat, the grain used to make lighter, leavened bread in other parts of Greece, is a rarity. It's considered a luxury. Barley is the food of soldiers, of peasants, of men who do not need soft things. Next comes cheese. This is your primary source of protein and fat, aside from the mysterious chunks in the black broth. It's a hard, salty goat's or sheep's cheese. The kind that can last for weeks without spoiling. It's strong-tasting and nourishing. A small wedge of cheese with your barley cake is a standard meal. It's simple, practical, and requires no cooking. It's the perfect food for a society that is always on a war footing. Finally, there are the figs. Dried figs are your candy, your dessert, your only consistent source of sweetness. They are energy-dense, portable, and can be stored for long periods. A handful of dried figs is a precious treat, a burst of flavor in a culinary landscape defined by its absence, along with the rare fruits of the season, like grapes or pomegranates. Figs represent the only real indulgence your diet allows. And that's pretty much it. Day in, day out. Barley, cheese, figs, and black broth. There are no elaborate vegetable dishes. No stews rich with herbs and spices. No delicate pastries. The concept of a varied diet for health or pleasure is completely alien. Food is fuel. Its purpose is to build a strong, lean body. Taste is a secondary, and largely irrelevant, consideration. Here is a lesser-known detail about the Spartan food supply. While the citizens' diet was austere, they had a particular fondness for hunting. The wild, mountainous terrain around Sparta was home to boar and deer. A successful hunt was a major event. The meat was a welcome and rare addition to the mess hall rations. But here's the Spartan twist according to the rules of the SYS Citian. A man who had a successful hunt was expected to share his prize with his messmates. However, he was allowed to eat his own share at home with his family before the communal meal, but he was still required to show up at the mess hall. If he ate too much at home and couldn't finish his regular ration of broth and barley at the public meal, he would be called out and shamed for his lack of self-control. Even a moment of private, well-earned indulgence was subject to public scrutiny and discipline. The extreme limitation of the Spartan diet raises a question that historians and nutritional scientists sometimes debate. Could such a monotonous diet actually provide all the necessary nutrients for a growing boy and an elite warrior? Barley is a good source of carbohydrates and fiber. Cheese provides protein and calcium, and figs offer sugar and minerals. The pork in the broth would have provided iron and B vitamins. On paper, it seems just about adequate. However, the lack of fresh green vegetables and a wider variety of fruits would have likely led to deficiencies in certain vitamins, like vitamin C. Some scholars speculate that Spartans may have suffered from low-level chronic nutritional deficiencies, which could have impacted their health in ways our ancient sources don't record. Was this diet a secret weapon, creating lean, tough soldiers, or was it a long-term liability? A weakness hidden beneath a veneer of ideological purity? We can only analyze the known ingredients and speculate on the unseen consequences. You look at your reflection in a pail of water. You are taller now, but rail thin. Your bones are prominent. Your muscles like cords under your skin. This is the body that barley, cheese, and figs have built. It's a body designed for endurance, not for show. You can run all day without tiring. You can withstand the cold and the heat, but there is a constant, hollow feeling that never quite goes away. You see traders from other cities sometimes. Their bodies softer, their faces fuller. They eat wheat bread, fish cooked with olive oil and lemon, vegetables stewed with garlic and herbs. They live in a different world, a world of flavors you can barely imagine. You are taught to see them with contempt. They are soft. Their food has made them weak. Your plain, repetitive, joyless diet is a badge of honor. It is the more that separates you, the disciplined warrior, from the decadent outsider. It is the taste of your superiority. Let's zoom in on that piece of bread in your hand. You've been calling it a barley cake. but its proper name is moza, and it is, without a doubt, the single most important food item in your life. You eat it every day, at every meal. The black broth may be more famous, but the moza is the bedrock of your diet. The silent, unassuming partner to the broth's loud, offensive performance. To an outsider, it would barely qualify as bread. When an Athenian thinks of bread, he thinks of artos elite, leavened loaf made from wheat flour, baked in an oven until it has a golden brown crust and a soft, airy interior. Artos is a product of civilization, of skill, of a culture that has time for things like yeast and proofing. You, however, eat moza. Moza is primal. It is barley flour, mixed with a little water or milk, and perhaps a drop of oil, kneaded into a stiff dough, and then either briefly baked on a hot stone or simply left to dry into a hard, flat cake. There is no yeast, no rising, no soft crumb. The texture is dense, crusty, and chewy. It's heavy in your stomach. It requires a strong jaw to get through. This isn't just a historical detail, it's a cultural dividing line. In the ancient Greek world, the type of bread you ate said a lot about who you were. Wheat eaters were seen as more refined, more urban. Barley eaters were peasants, soldiers, and, of course, Spartans. It was a form of class distinction you could taste. You use it as an all-purpose utensil. You tear off a piece to scoop up the black broth. Its gritty texture a strange contrast to the greasy liquid. You use it to wipe your bowl clean, leaving no drop of your precious ration behind. Sometimes, it's the entire meal, eaten with a hunk of salty cheese or a few sweet, sticky figs. Its flavor is, well, it's the flavor of barley, nutty, earthy, and profoundly plain. There is no salt in the cake itself, no herbs, nothing to distract from its fundamental purpose as caloric fuel. The production of this moza is a constant, laborious task performed by the helots. They are the ones who harvest the barley, who grind it into flour between heavy stones, who mix the dough and bake the endless supply of cakes needed to feed the Spartan state. Your entire military society is built upon this foundation of barley, and the enslaved labor required to produce it. Here's a small, fascinating culinary tidbit about moza. It wasn't just eaten as a hard cake. For a bit of variety, and variety is a very generous term here, it could be prepared differently. One common way was to make a sort of porridge or gruel by breaking up the moza and boiling it with water or milk. This dish, known as austere, would have been a soft, warm, and easily digestible meal, perhaps given to the very young or the very old. But there was another, more interesting preparation. The barley paste could be mixed with honey and oil to create a sort of sweetened, fried cake. This was likely a rare delicacy, perhaps associated with religious festivals or celebrations. Imagine the sheer bliss of that after months of plain, hard moza, being given a version that is sweet, rich, and fried. It would have been an explosion of flavor, a taste of a world of pleasure that was normally forbidden. However, the true nature of moza and its place in the Spartan diet is still a subject of some historical nuance and debate. The traditional view, promoted by ancient writers who wanted to emphasize Spartan austerity, is that they only ate moza and looked down on leavened wheat bread artos as a symbol of decadence. But archaeological and textual evidence suggests the reality might be a bit more complex. While barley was indeed the staple, wheat was also grown in Laconia, albeit in smaller quantities. It's plausible that artos was not entirely absent from Sparta, but was simply a luxury item, perhaps consumed by the kings or on special occasions. The strict black and white division between barley-eating Spartans and wheat-eating Athenians might be an oversimplification, a piece of cultural propaganda used by both sides. Some historians argue that the average Spartan's diet might have been slightly more varied than the grim picture painted by ancient moralists. The debate centers on whether the extreme austerity was an unbending, everyday reality for everyone, or an ideal that had certain exceptions and complexities that our sources, focused on the legend, chose to ignore. As you sit in the mess hall, chewing mechanically on your piece of mozza, you don't think about these complexities. You think about how it fills your stomach. You think about how its blandness is familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. It doesn't excite you, but it doesn't challenge you like the black broth does. It is the quiet, stoic foundation of your existence. You see the other boys, the men, all eating the same thing. This shared experience, this collective consumption of the same plain food, is a powerful bonding agent. You are all connected by this gritty, tasteless cake. It is the taste of equality, the enforced, joyless equality of the Spartan state. It is the taste of your brotherhood. A brotherhood built not on shared pleasures, but on shared hardship. Every bite is a reaffirmation of your identity. You are not a boy who eats soft wheat bread. You are a man who eats mozza. You're now a teenager, deep into the Agoge system. The rules of your world, which once seemed strange and harsh, are now second nature. The monotonous diet, the constant training, the threat of punishment, it's all just life. You begin to understand that your culinary suffering isn't just a matter of tradition, it's a matter of law. The legendary lawgiver, Lycurgus, the ghost who haunts every corner of your life, is said to have laid down a set of strict regulations designed to crush luxury in all its forms. These weren't just suggestions or moral guidelines, they were some PT laws, legally enforced rules about what people could own, wear, and, most importantly, eat. The goal was to engineer a society free from the corrupting influence of wealth and pleasure. In Sparta, fine dining wasn't just frowned upon, it was illegal. This legal prohibition against luxury is a cornerstone of the Spartan image. Any citizen caught hosting a private dinner party, serving food more elaborate than the mess hall standard, or using silver and gold dining ware would face severe penalties and public disgrace. The state had the right to inspect your home, to ensure you weren't hoarding wealth or indulging in secret comforts. This created a culture of mutual surveillance, where every citizen was a potential enforcer of the state's austere ideology. You learn about the story of a man named Alkindar. As a youth, he was part of a protest against Lycurgus's reforms, and in the chaos, he struck Lycurgus with a staff, blinding him in one eye. Instead of demanding revenge, Lycurgus took the boy into his own home. He didn't punish him. He simply made the boy live with him, observe his frugal lifestyle, and eat his simple meals. Through this daily exposure to Spartan austerity, the boy was completely converted and became one of Lycurgus's most ardent admirers. This story, whether true or not, is taught to you as a parable. The Spartan way of life is so morally superior that even its enemies will be won over by its simple, powerful logic. The law even dictated how your food should be prepared. Chefs and fancy cooks, who were celebrated figures in cities like Athens, were held in contempt in Sparta. A famous Spartan saying, often quoted by the elders, was that the best seasoning for any food is hunger. The idea of a gourmet was offensive. A man who needed complex flavors to enjoy his food was a man who had lost his way. The only acceptable cook was one who could prepare the simple, required dishes for the mess hall. Any attempt at culinary artistry was seen as a dangerous step towards softness and decadence. Here's a peculiar, almost funny, detail related to these laws. To ensure that no one could secretly flaunt their wealth by buying fancy ingredients, the state didn't just ban gold and silver coins, they actively limited contact with the outside world. Foreign travel for ordinary citizens was heavily restricted, lest you be corrupted by foreign ideas and luxurious habits. Similarly, they were highly suspicious of foreigners coming into Sparta, fearing they would import decadent tastes and practices. This isolationism, known as exenalasia, was essentially a state-sponsored policy of paranoia. They were trying to create a cultural quarantine, protecting their society from the disease of pleasure. They didn't just outlaw delicious food, they tried to outlaw the very knowledge of it. This brings us to a significant historical debate. How effective were these laws in reality? The official story, the one the Spartans told about themselves, is over perfect. unchanging system of absolute equality and austerity. But was this really the case for centuries? Many historians are skeptical. They argue that as Sparta's military power grew, so did its wealth. Victorious generals and kings would return from campaigns abroad with spoils of war, gold, silver, and luxury goods. Powerful Spartans began to accumulate wealth. Despite the laws against it, archaeological evidence from later periods in Spartan history shows an increase in luxury items, suggesting that the strict egalitarian ideal was beginning to fray. The debate centers on the gap between the law and the reality. Was the image of the austere, incorporate Spartan a myth they maintained for public relations while the elite grew secretly wealthy, or did the system genuinely hold for a long time, only to collapse under the pressure of imperial success? Some scholars believe the laws were always more of an ideal than a strictly enforced reality, with the powerful finding ways to live more comfortably than the average citizen. Others maintain that the system was remarkably robust for a very long time, and its eventual decline was a slow, painful process that Spartans themselves lamented. The truth of how much illegal luxury was bubbling just beneath the surface of Spartan society is a puzzle historians are still trying to solve. As a young man in the Agoge, you are shielded from these potential cracks in the system. You are living the ideal in its purest form. The law is absolute. The mess hall is your only restaurant. The black broth is your only main course. You are being conditioned to be a guardian of this system, to believe in its perfection and to be suspicious of any deviation. You hear stories about the Athenians, who spend their days in the marketplace arguing about philosophy and their nights at drinking parties, reclining on soft couches, eating peacocks and honeycakes. You are taught to sneer at this image. It is a portrait of a society on the verge of collapse, a society that has forgotten what it means to be strong. Your simple, legally enforced diet is not a deprivation. It is your shield. It is the law that keeps you pure, that keeps Sparta strong, that keeps the enemy at bay, and you are its loyal enforcer. As you grow older, you are introduced to another crucial element of the mess hall: experience wine. In the rest of Greece, wine is a centerpiece of culture. It fuels the great philosophical debates at Athenian symposia. It is praised in poetry, and it is central to the worship of Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and ecstatic release. For most Greeks, wine is a gift from the gods, a means to joy, inspiration, and social bonding. In Sparta, you learn that wine is not a gift. It's a test. Your first lessons in wine are lessons in suspicion. You are taught that wine is a dangerous substance, a potential gateway to the loss of control that is the ultimate Spartan sin. The goal is not to enjoy it, but to master it. This is why, at every meal, the wine served is heavily diluted with water, usually at a ratio of at least 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part wine. To drink wine unmixed, or akraton, is considered barbaric, a practice of foolish Thracians or decadent Ionians, but not of disciplined Spartan men. The purpose of the wine at your meal is primarily functional. It's a way to make potentially unsafe water potable. As the alcohol kills some of the bacteria, it provides a few extra calories, and it serves as a mild, very mild, social lubricant in a setting that is otherwise rigidly formal. But it is never, ever for the purpose of getting drunk. This is where one of the most infamous and cruel Spartan educational practices comes into play. It's a well-documented historical tradition to provide you and the other boys with a vivid, unforgettable lesson on the evils of intoxication. The elders would orchestrate a horrifying spectacle. They would select a few helots, the enslaved people who worked your lands, and force them to drink large quantities of unmixed wine. The helots would be dragged into the center of the mess hall, their bodies already clumsy, their speech slurred and nonsensical. They would be compelled to perform ridiculous songs, to dance foolishly, to tell embarrassing secrets. You and the other boys are made to watch. You see these men, stripped of their dignity, transformed into stumbling, incoherent jesters. The sight is meant to be disgusting. It is meant to burn into your mind a permanent association between drunkenness and utter, pathetic degradation. Look, Yoiren would say, his voice filled with contempt. This is what happens to a man who lets wine become his master. He becomes a slave in his mind. Just as these men are slaves in life, he loses his composure, his reason, his honor. He becomes an object of ridicule. This brutal object lesson uses the dehumanization of one group of people to enforce the discipline of another. It's a chillingly effective piece of psychological conditioning. The memory of the stumbling, shamed helot becomes a powerful internal check every time you raise a cup of wine to your lips. Here's a small, curious detail about Spartan drinking culture. While they abhorred individual drunkenness, they did have festivals where heavy drinking was part of the ritual, such as the Hyacinthia or the Carnea. However, even within these religious contexts, the Spartan ethos of control was paramount. A famous story tells of how the Spartan general Pausanias, after a great victory over the Persians, ordered his helot cooks to prepare two feasts. One was a lavish, extravagant Persian banquet, with rich carpets, gold and silver couches, and an endless array of gourmet dishes. The other was a standard Spartan mess hall meal. He then called in his fellow Greek commanders, pointed to the two displays, and said, "Men of Greece, I have brought you here to show you the folly of the Persian leader, who, having a lifestyle like this, came to rob us of our poverty, even in celebration." The lesson was about the moral superiority of their own austerity. The exact nature and frequency of the helot lesson is a topic of some debate among historians. Was this a regular occurrence in every mess hall, a standard part of the Agoge curriculum, as Plutarch implies, or was it a more sporadic, perhaps exaggerated, practice that became a key part of the Spartan legend? Some scholars argue that while the practice likely did occur, its depiction in our sources might be dramatized to make a stronger moral point. They question whether a society so paranoid about a helot uprising would regularly create situations where large numbers of their enslaved population were gathered together and made dangerously unpredictable with alcohol. Others maintain that the cruelty and psychological dominance of the act were precisely the point, a way of constantly reminding both the helots of their subjugation and the Spartans of their supposed superiority. The debate touches on the core question of how much of our information about Sparta is a literal description of reality versus a stylized, moralizing narrative. As you reach the age of 20 and become a full citizen, a warrior, you are allowed to drink more, but the rules remain. You are a man now, and the expectation of self-control is even higher. You might see a fellow soldier who has had a bit too much at a festival. He is not treated with comradely humor. He is shunned, shamed, and may face official reprimand. To be drunk is to be weak. To be drunk is to be like a helot. To be drunk is to be un-Spartan. The watered-down wine in your cup becomes a symbol. Just like the black broth, it's a symbol of moderation, of control, of the razor-thin line between civilized discipline and barbaric chaos. It is a constant, liquid reminder that you are a member of the ruling class, and the price of that privilege is the absolute and unwavering mastery of all your appetites. Years of the same barley cakes, the same salty cheese, and the same horrifying broth have fundamentally rewired your expectations of what a meal should be. Pleasure is not on the menu. Satisfaction is found in discipline, not flavor. But even in this culinary desert, there are occasional, fleeting moments of something that could almost be described as a treat. These are your desserts, though no Spartan would ever use such a frivolous word. The most common and celebrated of these rare additions comes from the hunt. The rugged hills and forests of the Taygetus Mountains that loom over Sparta are home to wild boar, deer, and hare. Hunting is not just a pastime for the Spartan elite, it's a vital part of their military training and identity. It teaches tracking, stealth, patience, and the skill of the kill. A man who is a good hunter is likely to be a good soldier. When a hunting party is successful, it's a cause for celebration, a muted, Spartan-style celebration. Of course, the prize, perhaps a wild boar, is brought back with pride, according to the strict rules of the mess hall. The hunter who made the kill is required to contribute his prize to the communal dinner. This act of sharing reinforces the collective ethos over individual achievement. The boar is butchered, and the meat is roasted over a simple fire. On that night, after you have dutifully consumed your standard portion of black broth and mozza, an attendant will come around with a platter of roasted meat. Each man in the mess receives a small, precious portion. This is the dessert. The taste is explosive. After a diet of bland, boiled, and sour things, the rich, smoky flavor of roasted pork, seasoned only with its own fat and the fire, is a revelation. It's a jolt to the senses, a reminder of a world of flavor that you are otherwise denied. The men eat it slowly, savoring each bite. No one speaks. It is a moment of shared, unspoken pleasure. This is a well-documented aspect of mess hall life. These occasional shares of game were the pinnacle of Spartan dining. Beyond the hunt, the other form of dessert is what was known as the epiklon. This was a secondary, voluntary course that could be brought to the mess hall by a wealthier citizen to supplement the basic ration. The term literally means that which is brought on top. This was the one tiny loophole in the otherwise rigid system of culinary equality. A man who had a particularly good harvest from his orchard, or who had perhaps traded for a small luxury, could bring something extra to share with his messmates. This might be a basket of ripe grapes or pomegranates. It could be a special type of sausage, like the famed Lokoniko scald is made from hare, which was actually prized in other parts of Greece. It might even be a small portion of wheat bread, the artos that was considered a luxury. The man who brought the epiklon was not allowed to skip the main meal. He had to eat his full share of the standard rations first. The dessert was an addition, a gift to the group, not a replacement. Here is a small, curious detail about this practice. It created a subtle form of social currency. While everyone ate the same required meal, the man who could frequently afford to bring a nice epiklon was displaying his wealth and generosity. It was a way to gain prestige and influence within the mess group without overtly breaking the laws against luxury. He wasn't hosting a private party, he was simply enhancing the communal meal. It was a fine line to walk. If the offering was too extravagant, he might be accused of showing off and trying to curry favor, which was frowned upon. But a consistent, modest offering was a sign of a successful and generous citizen. The existence of the epiklon is at the heart of a historical debate about the true nature of Spartan equality. The official narrative, the one you are taught, is one of absolute egalitarianism. Every man is the same, eating the same meal. But the epiklon system suggests a different reality, one with cracks in the facade. It proves that some Spartans were richer than others and there was a socially acceptable way to display this wealth. Historians argue over how much this practice undermined the supposed equality of the Spartan. Was it a minor, harmless custom, as some sources suggest, or was it a significant indicator of a growing economic inequality that the state was unable, or unwilling, to fully suppress? It suggests that even in the most rigid system, human nature finds a way to create hierarchy and distinction. The perfect Spartan ideal may have been more of a myth than a reality. For you, a young man, these desserts are rare and precious moments. A piece of roasted meat, a handful of sweet grapes, these are the highlights of your culinary year. They are made all the more intense by their scarcity. The pleasure is amplified by the backdrop of constant deprivation. This is perhaps the most subtle lesson of all. The state doesn't forbid pleasure entirely. It controls it. It rations it. By making these treats rare and communal, it teaches you to associate pleasure not with private indulgence, but with shared, state-sanctioned events. Your joy is not your own, it belongs to the group. Even the sweetest fig is another tool for your indoctrination, another reminder that everything you have, everything you enjoy, comes from your participation in the collective. You are now in your late teens, on the cusp of manhood. You are no longer one of the little boys, the paydas, but you are not yet a full-fledged warrior. You are in a liminal state. and the scrutiny you are under has never been more intense. The mess hall, the SYS Citium, transforms from a place of simple eating and learning into a stage for your final, most subtle examinations. The men, the full citizens at the other tables, are watching you, but the most important eyes belong to the officers and elders at your own table. Every meal is an audition. The elders, men who have survived decades of war and politics, are masters of observation. They watch how you carry yourself. Do you enter the hall with the quiet confidence of a warrior? Or do you shuffle in? Do you use it with a straight back? Or do you slump with fatigue? They are looking for signs of weakness, of softness, of any deviation from the Spartan ideal. The food itself becomes a prop in this ongoing drama. The way you handle your meal is a direct reflection of your character. Do you attack your food with crude, animalistic hunger, or do you eat with a disciplined, deliberate pace when the rare portion of roasted meat is served? Do your eyes light up with greed when you are passed over for a second helping? Does a flicker of disappointment cross your face? They are watching for these tiny, involuntary tells. They are assessing your mastery over your appetites. This constant observation by the elders is a well-documented feature of the Agoge. It was a system of perpetual, informal testing. Your entire life was a performance for a critical audience. This ensured that the values of the state were not just taught, but were eternalized and constantly performed. One of the key ways the elders would test you was through conversation. Dinner was not a time for idle chatter, but for pointed, educational dialogue. An elder might turn to you suddenly and ask a difficult question, a sort of moral or tactical puzzle. What is the highest form of courage, or why is a short response better than a long one, or if you could save your brother or save 10 citizens, what would you do? Your answer had to be perfect. It needed to be laconic, brief, witty, and wise. A long, rambling answer was a sign of a muddled mind. A foolish answer was a sign of a poor education. A hesitant answer was a sign of fear. The pressure was immense. You had to think on your feet, under the piercing gaze of men who held your future in their hands. A good answer might earn you a nod of approval or, as mentioned before, a piece of meat from the elder's own portion, a public mark of favor. A bad answer would result in silence, contempt, or that humiliating pinch on the thumb. Here's a small, curious detail about the power dynamics in the mess hall. The groups of 15 men were not just random assortments, they were tight-knit brotherhoods. They fought together as a unit in the phalanx. This meant that the men at your table were the ones you would entrust your life to in battle. The bonds formed over these austere meals were as critical as the bonds formed in training. The elders weren't just judging you for their own sake, they were judging whether you were worthy of protecting the man next to them. Could they rely on you? Was your character as strong as your spear? The simple act of sharing a bowl of black broth was a prelude to the much more serious act of sharing a wall of shield. This brings us to a subtle historical debate about the purpose of this intense scrutiny. Was it truly about molding character and finding the best warriors, as the Spartans themselves believed, or was it primarily a mechanism of social control? Some historians argue that the system was less about identifying genuine virtue and more about enforcing absolute conformity. The correct answers to the elders' questions were likely well known and dogmatic. The goal wasn't to encourage critical thinking, but to reward the boys who best parroted the state's ideology. The system might have selected for obedience and political savvy rather than true courage or wisdom. It created men who were good at playing the game, at performing the role of the perfect Spartan. Others contend that this is too cynical of you. They argue that in a society constantly at war, the need for genuinely reliable and tough soldiers was paramount. The tests, however flawed, were a sincere attempt to identify the young men who possessed the mental and emotional fortitude to lead and to survive. The debate centers on whether the Agoge's main product was disciplined soldiers or indoctrinated sycophants. You feel the weight of this judgment every evening. The simple room, with its hard benches and plain tables, feels like a courtroom. The gazes of the elders are like hot lamps. You learn to build a wall around your emotions, to project an aura of calm, disciplined control. You eat your food with practiced indifference. You formulate your answers to potential questions in your head. You are becoming a politician as much as a soldier, learning to navigate the complex social dynamics of your mess group. This is the final stage of the furnace. The heat is no longer the overt fire of the whip or the gnawing pain of hunger. It is the intense, invisible pressure of constant social evaluation. The state is no longer just shaping your body, it is shaping your mind, your personality, your very soul, and the final product. The man who emerges from this process at age 20 will be ready to take his place in the phalanx, a perfect, interchangeable, and utterly loyal part of the Spartan machine. One evening, a rare event disrupts the monotonous rhythm of the mess hall. A guest is present. He is a merchant from Athens, a man named Demetrios, who has come to Sparta on some official business and has been granted the high honor, or perhaps the dubious privilege of dining in your SYS city. His presence sends a small, unspoken ripple through the room. An outsider is here. The performance must be perfect. Demetrios is easy to spot. His tunic is made of a finer linen than your coarse wool, and it is immaculately clean. His hair is cut shorter and distilled with a fragrant oil, whose scent is a strange and unwelcome perfume in the stark, functional air of the hall. He carries himself with a certain theatricality, a practiced ease that seems out of place here. He is a man accustomed to comfort, to conversation, to pleasure. He is everything you have been taught to despise. He is seated at the main table with the elders. You and the other young men watch him from your benches, your curiosity masked by a veneer of indifference. This is a living lesson, a chance to see the other up close. The meal begins. The helots bring out the usual fare: the hard moza cakes, the bowls of black broth, the cups of heavily watered wine. Demetrios watches the proceedings with a look of polite bewilderment when a bowl of the Melas, Zomos, is placed before him. His smile tightens just a little at the edges. You see him glance at the dark, viscous liquid, his nostrils flaring slightly at the vinegary, metallic smell. An elder, a man with a face like a roadmap of old battles, gestures towards the bowl. "Our famous broth," he says, his voice flat. "It makes strong men." Demetrios picks up his piece of moza, his movements elegant and practiced. He is trying to be a good guest. He dips a small corner into the broth and raises it to his mouth. You and every other boy in the room are watching this exact moment. It's better than any helot spectacle. This is a real-time review from the heart of the decadent world. He takes a bite. His body goes rigid. For a split second, the mask of polite interest drops, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes widen. A faint green tinge appears on his face. He struggles to chew and swallow, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively. He quickly takes a large gulp of the watered wine, as if trying to extinguish a fire. He manages to compose himself, forcing a weak, watery smile. "It is very hearty," he says, his voice strained. The Spartans at his table do not laugh. They simply watch him, their expressions unreadable. His reaction is exactly what they expected. It is a confirmation of their own superiority. His weakness, his inability to stomach their daily food, is proof of his culture's softness. This scene, or variations of it, is a common trope in ancient literature about Sparta. Writers like Plutarch and Herodotus are full of anecdotes about foreigners reacting with horror or disbelief to Spartan customs, especially their food. These stories serve to highlight the vast cultural gap between Sparta and the rest of the Greek world. They were a form of entertainment, but also a form of cultural definition. By describing what the Spartans were not pleasure-seeking, verbose, luxurious, they helped to create the powerful and enduring Spartan myth. Here's a small, interesting detail from the other side of this cultural exchange. While Spartans were horrified by Athenian luxury, Athenians were often morbidly fascinated by Spartan toughness. Some wealthy young Athenians would go through periods of laconism, where they would adopt Spartan habits as a sort of countercultural fashion statement. They would let their hair grow long, wear simple cloaks, carry walking sticks, and effect a blunt, laconic speaking style. It was a form of philosophical tourism, a way of playing at being a hardened warrior without actually having to endure the brutal reality of the Agoge or the taste of black broth. It was the ancient equivalent of a city dweller spending a weekend roughing it in the wilderness. The presence of this Athenian guest, however, raises a complex question for historians. How much did the two societies actually interact? The traditional image of Sparta is one of extreme isolationism, the XNL Asia policy that legally restricted foreigners. But the reality was likely more porous. Sparta was the dominant military power in Greece for a long time. It could not have existed in a total vacuum. There were diplomatic missions, trade however limited, military alliances, and athletic contests like the Olympic Games where Spartans and Athenians would meet. The debate among scholars centers on the extent and nature of this interaction. Was Sparta a truly closed society, like a North Korea of the ancient world, or was the isolationism an ideology that was often bent for practical reasons of statecraft and commerce? The story of Demetrios in the mess halls suggests that some contact was permitted, but that it was a carefully managed and controlled form of cultural exchange, designed to reinforce Sparta's own sense of identity. The rest of the meal is an exercise in excruciating politeness. Demetrios barely touches his broth. He nibbles at his dry barley cake. He listens as the elders discuss route movements and the finer points of phalanx tactics. His face is a mask of strained attention, but his eyes betray a desperate longing to be somewhere else, anywhere else. His shock and disgust are a mirror for you. In his reaction, you see your outruns formation. What is torture to him is Tuesday to you. The food that he finds inedible is the very substance that has built your body and disciplined your mind. His revulsion validates your entire upbringing. It confirms that you are hard, that you are strong, that you are different, you are a Spartan. And he, with his soft tunic and his horrified palate, is the reason you must exist. We've spent all this time in the barracks and mess halls, in the hyper-masculine world of the Agoge. But what about the other half of the population? What were the women of Sparta eating while you were choking down black broth and learning to steal foxes? To understand the full picture of Spartan society, we need to take a brief detour from your journey and look at the lives of your mother and sisters. Spartan women were famous throughout the ancient world for their independence, their sharp tongues, and their perceived influence in a society otherwise dominated by men. An Athenian woman lived a cloistered, domestic life, largely confined to her home. A Spartan woman, by contrast, was a public figure. Since the men were almost entirely dedicated to military life, women were responsible for managing the households, the estate scale arrow, and the family finances. They were the logistical backbone of the Spartan state. This greater responsibility was reflected in their upbringing and their diet. While you were taken away to the Agoge at age 7, your sister remained at home, but she was not idle. She, too, underwent a form of state-sponsored education. It wasn't the brutal Agoge, but it was a rigorous system focused on physical fitness. Young Spartan girls participated in athletic training, including running, wrestling, discus, and javelin. The goal was to produce strong, healthy mothers who would, in turn, produce strong, healthy children, preferably boys who would become future warriors. The famous lawgiver Lycurgus is said to have reasoned that strong parents make strong children. This focus on female health meant that Spartan girls and women were fed much better than their counterparts in other Greek cities. While you were being systematically starved to make you lean and tough, your sister was given plentiful, nutritious food. Her diet would have been based on the same Spartan staples: barley, cheese, figs, and wine, but the portions would have been larger and the overall diet likely more varied and balanced. She was not eating black broth. That particular culinary horror was reserved for the men's messes, a ritual of male bonding and military discipline. Her meals would have been simpler, peasant-style fare, but wholesome and sufficient. This is a well-established historical fact. Spartan women were famously well-fed and healthy compared to other Greek women. a fascinating and slightly scandalous detail about Spartan women was their participation in public athletic events. At certain religious festivals, young women would compete, sometimes in the nude, just like the men. This was utterly shocking to outsiders. An Athenian would have been horrified by the sight of unmarried girls wrestling and running in public. For the Spartans, it was a logical extension of their philosophy. It celebrated the physical prowess of their women and was seen as a way of promoting good health and a competitive spirit. It also, of course, reinforced the idea that a woman's primary duty was to be a physically excellent vessel for producing the next generation of soldiers. This leads to a point of contention and debate among historians, particularly feminist scholars. Was the relative freedom and high status of Spartan women a form of proto-feminism, or was it just a different, more practical form of patriarchal control? Some scholars argue that Spartan women possessed genuine power and agency. They could inherit and own property. They were educated, and their voices were respected in a way that was unheard of elsewhere in Greece. They were not just baby producers, they were crucial managers of the state's economy. Other historians argue that this freedom was an illusion, or at least had a very specific purpose. Women were given these roles and this physical training not for their own self-fulfillment, but because it best served the needs of the male-dominated military state. Their health was important because the state needed healthy male babies. Their management of the estates was necessary because the men were busy with military duties. In this view, the Spartan woman was not free in a modern sense. She was simply another high-quality, well-maintained piece of state equipment, just like a well-trained soldier or a sharp spear. The debate over whether to view Spartan women as empowered agents or as tools of a militaristic patriarchy is ongoing and complex. As a young Spartan man, your relationship with the women in your life is formal and distant. You live apart from your mother and sisters from the age of 7. You will not marry until you are older, perhaps around 30. And even then, for the first few years, you will continue to live in the barracks, only visiting your wife in secret at night. The women you encounter are not the demure, silent figures of other cities. They are confident, outspoken, and physically formidable. They are the ones who will praise your courage or, more terrifyingly, shame you for your cowardice. The famous "come back with your shield" or "on it command from your mother" is a perfect example of their role as the guardians of Spartan honor. They don't offer you comfort, they offer you a standard to live up to. And their diet, their strength, their very presence is a constant reminder of what you are fighting for: the continuation of this strange, flawed, and unique way of life. They are the bedrock upon which the entire military system is built. Now, let's turn our attention to the silent, invisible figures who make your entire lifestyle possible: the helots. They are the ones who till the soil of your kalaros, the plot of land that funds your seat at the mess hall. They are the ones who harvest the barley, press the grapes, and tend the fig trees. They are the ones who cook the food in the mess hall kitchens, who serve you your bowl of black broth, and who clean up after you have gone. Without them, the Spartan state would collapse overnight. The helots are not slaves in the same way an Athenian might own a slave. An Athenian slave was the private property of an individual citizen. The helots are collectively owned by the Spartan state. They are serfs, bound to the land they work. They cannot be sold or moved off their ancestral farms. They are the descendants of the original inhabitants of Laconia and Messenia, the neighboring territory that Sparta conquered and subjugated centuries ago. They outnumber you and your fellow Spartiates by a huge margin, perhaps as much as 10 to 1. This demographic imbalance is the source of Sparta's deepest paranoia and the ultimate justification for its brutal, all-encompassing military machine. Your entire life is a training exercise designed to keep this massive, resentful population under control. So what do the people who grow your food get to eat themselves? The answer is, predictably, not much. The system was designed to be extractive. A helot family was required to turn over a fixed portion of everything they produced from the land to its Spartan master. This portion, the barley, wine, cheese, and figs were specifically calculated to be the amount needed for the Spartan's contribution to his mess hall. Whatever was left over after this rent was what the helot family had to live on for the entire year. Their diet would have been a meager, stripped-down version of your own. They would eat the same barley, but likely in the form of a simple porridge or gruel, as the better quality flour might be reserved for the master's mother. They would have access to some vegetables from their own small garden plots, onions, cabbages, legumes, things that were not part of your official, austere ration. Meat would have been an extreme rarity. Perhaps only if an animal died of natural causes or if they managed to trap some small game without being caught and accused of poaching. Theirs was a subsistence diet, a life lived on the leftovers, always teetering on the edge of malnutrition. This economic exploitation is the fundamental, mainstream understanding of the helot system. Here's a small, grim detail about the relationship between Spartan food and helot subjugation. The Spartans had a unique and cruel institution known as the Cryptii. This was a secret police, was composed of the most promising and ruthless young men from the Agoge. At certain times, members of the Cryptii would be sent out into the countryside with nothing but a dagger. Their mission was to live off the land, hide during the day, and at night, to hunt and kill any helot they found out on the roads. This was both advanced survival training and a calculated campaign of terror, designed to eliminate any potential helot leaders and keep the population terrified and subdued. For a helot, the simple act of trying to get extra food or visit another village at night could be a death sentence. The historical debate surrounding the helots is one of the most intense in the study of ancient Sparta. The central question is, what was the true nature of their existence? Our primary sources are all written by elite Greeks, mostly Athenians who viewed the helots through their own lens of prejudice and fascination. They present a picture of a brutally oppressed people, constantly on the verge of rebellion. This has led some modern historians to view Spartan society as a form of ancient apartheid, a uniquely cruel system of racial and economic subjugation. However, other scholars suggest the reality might have been more complex. They argue that while the system was undeniably brutal, the helots did have certain rights that other Greek slaves lacked. They had a right to their own families, their own religion, and to keep a portion of their produce. Some could even accumulate a small amount of personal wealth. This has led to a revisionist view that, while still acknowledging the system's harshness, sees the helots as having more agency and a more developed community life than the traditional narrative allows. Was their existence one of unmitigated, daily terror, or was it a more nuanced reality of oppression, mixed with resilience and small pockets of autonomy? The lack of any direct voice from the helots themselves means this debate will likely never be fully resolved. For you, the young Spartan, the helots are a constant but distant presence. You are taught from birth to see them as inherently inferior, as dangerous but necessary tools. You see them working in the fields as you march to your training. You see their downcast eyes as they serve you in the mess hall. You are forbidden from having any real interaction with them. They are the other that defines your us. The food they place before you is a symbol of this chasm. It is the fruit of their labor, transformed into the instrument of your discipline. The barley cake in your hand represents not just austerity, but power. It is a physical manifestation of a system that starves one group of people to forge another into an army of masters. Every bite you take is a reaffirmation of your place at the very top of this brutal, unbalanced pyramid. Even in a society as grim and disciplined as Sparta, there are moments of collective release. These are the religious festivals, ancient rituals dedicated to the gods that provide a brief, sanctioned break from the relentless routine of military life. But if you're imagining a carnival of feasting and merrymaking like you might find in another Greek city, you would be sorely mistaken. A Spartan feast is, by any other standard, just a slightly less miserable meal. The most important festivals in your calendar are the Hyacinthia, the Cornea, and the Gymnopoedia. These are deeply serious religious occasions, entwined with Spartan identity, mythology, and military values. The Gymnopoedia, for instance, is a festival of unarmed dancing, where men and boys perform strenuous choral dances and athletic displays under the blazing summer sun, a testament to their physical endurance. The Hyacinthia is a more solemn affair, beginning with a day of mourning for a slain mythological hero before moving into a more celebratory phase. During these festivals, the ironclad rules of the mess hall are slightly relaxed. The change is not in what you eat, but in the quantity and the atmosphere. On a festival day, the standard meal of black broth and barley cake is supplemented with more generous offerings. The portion of roasted meat, usually a rare treat from the hunt, becomes a standard part of the feast. This is often a sacrifice made to the gods, with the worshippers then sharing in the consecrated meat. So, instead of a tiny sliver, you might receive a proper slice of roasted goat or pork. The bread might also be different. Instead of the usual hard moza, you might be served actual leavened wheat bread, artus. This is a significant luxury, a taste of the soft life that is normally forbidden. Special pastries or cakes made with honey, cheese, and barley flour, things you might only taste once or twice a year, are also prepared. These dishes, like the Tiger Knight's sort of pancake, would be an explosion of sweetness and richness to a palate accustomed to sourness and salt. The wine, too, flows a little more freely, while still likely mixed with water. The ratio might be more generous, and the mood in the mess hall might shift from its usual to mic silence to something approaching quiet convivialia. This is the mainstream understanding of a Spartan festival, not an abandonment of austerity, but a modest increase in rations, sanctioned by religious tradition. Now for a peculiar detail about Spartan feasting etiquette. During the Hyacinthia festival, there was a specific meal known as the Kops. It was a public feast where citizens would set up tents and entertain guests. But the etiquette was bizarrely specific. According to the ancient writer Athena Eos, you were served a generous portion of meat, but you were only allowed to take that one portion. There were no second helpings. You were also served a specific type of bread, and after the main meal, you were given a simple dessert of cheese, figs, and beans. The meal was generous by Spartan standards, but still rigidly controlled in portion. It was a feast on a leash, a perfect metaphor for Spartan society. Even in celebration, the rules were paramount. This brings up a subtle historical debate. What was the true purpose of these festivals? Were they genuine moments of religious piety and communal joy, or were they just another to love the state? A way to provide a controlled release valve for the immense pressure of daily life. Some anthropologists and historians argue that festivals in highly rigid societies act as a form of social safety mechanism. By allowing a temporary, controlled suspension of the rules, the state prevents the system from breaking under its own oppressive weight. The festival is a way to let off steam in a way that doesn't threaten the underlying power structure. Other scholars focus more on the religious and identity-forming aspect. They argue that these festivals were sincere expressions of Spartan belief, moments where the community came together to honor their gods and reaffirm their shared values: endurance, discipline, and military prowess. The dances of the gym no por edia weren't just a spectacle, they were a prayer offered through physical exertion. The feasts weren't just about food, they were a communion with the gods and with fellow citizens. The debate centers on whether to view these events through a cynical, political lens, social control, or a more empathetic, cultural one, religious expression. For you, a young man who has known nothing but deprivation, a festival day is a beacon in the monotonous grey of your life. The promise of a full portion of meat and a sweet honey cake is enough to keep you motivated through weeks of grueling training. When the day finally arrives, the experience is almost overwhelming. The taste of the rich meat, the sweetness of the pastry, the slightly more relaxed atmosphere, it's a heady, dejeuner experience. But even in this moment of plenty, the system is still teaching you. It teaches you that abundance is a gift, a rare exception granted by the gods and the state, not a right. It reinforces the idea that true pleasure is found not in daily indulgence, but in these fleeting, communal moments of sanctioned celebration. As you eat your festival meal, surrounded by your comrades, you feel a surge of gratitude and loyalty. You are grateful to the gods, and you are grateful to the state that provides for you. The feast, like the first, is just another way of ensuring you remain a loyal, obedient, and thankful Spartan. You are 20 years old. You have survived the Agoge. You are no longer a boy. You have been honed into a weapon. Your body lean and hard. Your mind disciplined and unquestioning. You have passed all the tests of endurance, stealth, unpaid. But there is one final, crucial test to pass before you can be called a full citizen. A homo ios, one of the peers or equals. It is a test that has very little to do with your fighting skill and everything to do with the food on your table. To become a full citizen, you must be elected into a SYS citizen, one of the communal dining messes. This is not automatic. You must be nominated by an existing member, and then your candidacy is put to a vote by the other 14 men in that group, as you learned it on your first day in the mess hall. That vote is conducted in absolute secrecy. Each man casts a ballot by dropping a piece of soft bread dough into a basin. A simple ball of dough is a yes. A piece that has been squeezed and flattened is a no. A single no vote, just one, is enough to deny you entry. You are blackballed. If you are rejected, your life is effectively over before it has begun. You are denied full citizenship. You become a hypomeion, an inferior, a man who lives in a state of social disgrace. You cannot hold office. You cannot vote. And you are forever marked by the shame of your rejection. All those years of brutal training, all those bowls of black broth, all for nothing. The pressure is astronomical. But let's say you pass. You are accepted. You are now a peer. You are given your share of public land. Your kaleros, worked by a family of helots. And with this land comes the single, most important responsibility of your adult life. You must, every month, contribute your required share of produce to the mess hall. This contribution is specific and non-negotiable. The numbers, recorded by Plutus, give us a clear picture of your monthly grocery bill: about 1.5 bushels of barley, about 11 or 12 gallons of wine, 5 pounds of cheese, 2.5 pounds of figs, and a very small amount of iron money to buy the meat for the broth. This system of mandatory contributions is a bedrock historical fact of Spartan civic life. This is the price of citizenship. It is a lifelong subscription fee to the Club of Spartan equals. If, at any point in your life, you fail to make your monthly payment, if your harvest fails, if your helots are unproductive, if you mismanage your estate, you are summarily kicked out of the mess. And if you are kicked out of the mess, you lose your citizenship. You are demoted to the status of a hypomeion, just like the young man who was never elected in the first place. This creates a relentless, lifelong pressure. Your status as one of the elite is not guaranteed by birth or by your performance in the Agoge. It is contingent on your ongoing ability to be a productive landowner. The state gives you the land and the labor, but the responsibility to manage it effectively is entirely yours. Here's a small, curious detail that reveals the precariances of this system. What happened if a man had many sons? Only the oldest son would typically inherit the family kaleros. The younger sons would have to find their own way. They might be able to marry an heiress who had no brothers, or they might be granted a new plot of land if Sparta conquered new territory. But often, they were left in a vulnerable position. Many younger sons of perfectly respectable Spartan families ended up falling into the inferior class simply because they lacked the economic means to fund their seat at the table. This created a class of disenfranchised, discontented men within Spartan society. This economic basis for citizenship is a major topic of historical debate. The Spartans called their elite class the homo ioi, the equals or peers. But how equal were they really? The system seems designed to create equality, with everyone contributing the same amount and eating the same food. However, historians argue that this system inevitably created inequality over time. A man with a fertile plot of land and few children would find it easy to meet his obligations and might even have a surplus, which he could use to gain influence, perhaps by providing an ICPIKL on. A man with a poor plot of land and many sons would be under constant financial strain. always one bad harvest away from losing his status. The debate centers on whether this system was a brilliant mechanism for ensuring a dedicated, land-owning warrior class, or a flawed, brittle system that inevitably led to a demographic crisis. Over time, the number of full citizens in Sparta dramatically declined. More and more men were losing their status and falling into the ranks of the inferiors. Some historians argue that this was a direct result of the rigid kalos and mess hall contribution system. The high price of citizenship, payable only in food, was a primary cause of Sparta's eventual decline. The system designed to create a legion of equals ended up creating a tiny, shrinking elite and a growing population of the disenfranchised. You have now taken your seat at the table as a man. You are no longer a boy being tested. You are a contributor, a shareholder in the enterprise of Sparta. The food before you now tastes different. It is no longer just a tool of your oppression. It is the symbol of your status, the physical proof of your belonging. Every bite of the gritty barley cake, every swallow of the sour broth, is a taste of your success. But it is a precarious success. You look at the men around you, your peers, and you know that each one of you is bound by the same fragile thread, the constant, unending duty to provide your share. Your citizenship is not a right, it's a rental, and the rent is due every single month. For generations, the system is held. You are now a man in your prime, a veteran of several campaigns. You have raised sons and sent them to the Agoge. You have managed your kaleros, paid your dues to the mess hall, and lived the life of a Spartan peer. The world, as you know it, is built on the bedrock of lycurg and discipline. The black broth, the hard benches, the contempt for luxury, these are the pillars of Spartan strength, the reasons for your victories on the battlefield. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, you begin to see cracks appearing in the great wall of Spartan austerity. The world outside is changing, and Sparta, despite its best efforts at isolation, is not immune. The turning point was the Great War against Athens, the Peloponnesian War. Sparta won. The victory was total, and with victory came power, influence, and, most dangerously of all, wealth. Suddenly, Sparta was no longer just the dominant power in the Peloponnese. It was the master of an empire that stretched across the Aegean. In the form of gold and silver, not useless iron rods began to flow into the city from the conquered states. This influx of foreign wealth was like a poison seeping into the foundations of your society. The laws of Lycurgus were still on the books, but they were now in direct conflict with the new reality of imperial power. Generals and governors sent abroad to manage the new empire were exposed to the luxurious lifestyles of the Persians and Ionians. They developed a taste for comfort, for fine things, for power that was personal, not collective. Many returned to Sparta as rich men, their heads filled with dangerous, un-Spartan ideas. You start to see the evidence in small, subtle ways. A high-ranking officer might have a cloak made of a slightly finer wool. Another might be rumored to own a set of silver cups, kept hidden in his home. The UPAI Teolon, the voluntary dessert at the mess hall, becomes more common and more extravagant. The quiet competition to display wealth, once a subtle undercurrent, becomes more overt. The old ethos of equality begins to feel like a sham. This slow erosion of the traditional Spartan values following their victory over Athens is a well-documented historical process. One of the most famous examples of this corruption is the story of Gylippus, the Spartan commander who helped defeat the Athenians at Syracuse. He was entrusted with delivering a vast sum of silver to the authorities back in Sparta. On the way, he couldn't resist the temptation. He secretly unstitched the bottom of the sacks, stole a significant amount of the silver for himself, and then crudely sewed them back up. But he was clumsy. He didn't realize that each sack contained a small note, a sky tale, detailing the exact amount of money inside. When the authorities in Sparta counted the silver and read the notes, his theft was immediately discovered. He was so disgraced that he had to flee Sparta and live the rest of his life in exile. His story becomes a cautionary tale, a symbol of how foreign money was corrupting even the best Spartan commanders. Here's a small, telling detail about this period of change. As wealth became concentrated in the hands of a few, many Spartan citizens found it harder and harder to compete. They lost their lands and were unable to pay their mess hall dues, falling into the inferior class. This shrinking of the citizen body became a severe military crisis. To fill the ranks of the army, Sparta began to rely more on non-citizen soldiers, including helots who were offered their freedom in exchange for military service. These newly freed helots were called neo-damodes. The sight of these former slaves fighting in the phalanx alongside true Sparta I-8 would have been a shocking and deeply unsettling sign of how much the old system was breaking down. The historical debate here is fierce. What was the primary cause of Sparta's decline? Was it this moral and economic corruption? This turning away from the ancestral laws of Lycurgus? As ancient writers like Plutarch and Xenophon argued, they saw it as a straightforward morality play. Sparta was strong when it was austere, and it became weak when it embraced wealth. However, many modern historians argue that this is too simplistic. They suggest that the corruption was a symptom, not the cause. The real problems were structural: the rigid land tenure system, the shrinking citizen class, the failure to adapt to new forms of warfare and diplomacy. These were the deep-seated issues that lead to Sparta's downfall. The influx of wealth simply accelerated a process of decay that was already underway. The debate is essentially between a moral explanation for the decline and an economic structural one. Was Sparta a victim of its own greed, or was it a victim of its own rigid, unworkable system? You sit in the mess hall, now and elder yourself. The room looks the same. The benches are just as hard. The black broth in your bowl smells just as sour. But the spirit is different. There is a tension in the air, a sense of hypocrisy. You look at the men around you. Some are fabulously wealthy, their power extending far beyond the borders of Sparta. Others are struggling to hold on to their land, their sons facing the prospect of disenfranchisement. The pretense of being equals is becoming harder and harder to maintain. The food, once a symbol of unity and shared hardship, now seems to mock you. It represents an ideal that no longer matches the reality. You are all eating the same simple meal, but you are no longer the same. The cracks are widening, and you fear that one day soon, the whole edifice, built on centuries of discipline and sour soup, will come crumbling down. So after this long journey through Spartan dining, from your first terrifying taste of black broth to the anxious meals of a citizen in waiting, it's time to take a step back. We need to do what historians do: sift through the stories, their jokes, and the legends to try and figure out what was real and what was exaggeration. The image of Spartan food culture is so powerful, so extreme, that it can be hard to separate the historical fact from the ancient propaganda. Let's start with the star of our show, the Melas Zomos, the black broth. Was it truly as disgusting as the legend says? Fact, there is no doubt that the Spartan mess halls served a staple soup made from pork, blood, and vinegar. This is consistently reported by multiple ancient sources, including those who were contemporaries of the Spartans. Like Xenophon, its existence is a mainstream historical fact. The joke, the famous story of the Sybarite who said he now understood why Spartans don't fear death, is almost certainly an embellished anecdote. It's a perfect punchline, a piece of ancient stand-up comedy that brilliantly captures the Athenian view of their rivals. While the broth was likely unpalatable to an outsider, the story is probably a polished, exaggerated version of a real sentiment. It was just too good a joke not to repeat. What about the broader diet? Was it really just barley, cheese, figs, and broth? Fact, the core of the Spartan diet, especially for the men in the SYS Citian, was indeed based on this limited set of ingredients. The monthly contributions required from each citizen confirm this. It was, by any measure, a monotonous and austere diet, deliberately stripped of luxury. The exaggeration, the idea that Spartans never ate anything else, is likely an oversimplification. As we've discussed, meat from hunting was a prized addition. The existence of the EPIKL shows that other foods, wheat bread, different kinds of sausages, fruits did make their way into the mess halls. Even if they were rare, furthermore, the diet of women and children was likely more varied. The popular image of a society eating literally nothing but 4 or 5 things is a caricature, albeit one based on a grim reality, and the most dramatic story of all, the boy who let a fox disembowel him rather than be caught stealing. In fact, the practice of encouraging boys to steal food and punishing them only if caught is well documented. It was a formal, if brutal, part of the Agoge training. The legendary story of the fox is the ultimate Spartan moral tale. Plutarch, who tells it, lived centuries after Sparta's classical heyday. He was writing for a Roman audience, using stories about Sparta to make points about courage, discipline, and the decline of morals in his own time. The fox story is almost certainly a folk tale, a piece of extreme, idealized propaganda. It's not history, it's a parable. It's possible a boy was once scratched by a stolen animal, and the story grew in the telling over generations until it became this epic tale of silent, bloody sacrifice. This leads us to the biggest question that historians are still debating today. Who created the Spartan myth? Was it the Spartans themselves, or was it their enemies and admirers? One school of thought argues that the Spartans were masters of propaganda. They carefully cultivated their image of being superhumanly tough, disciplined, and austere. They didn't write much down, which allowed them to control their narrative through actions under all traditions. The Black Broth's fearsome reputation was a weapon. The stories of their harsh upbringing were a deterrent. In this view, the Spartans were actively curating their own legend. The other school of thought, which is more common today, is that the Spartan myth was largely an invention of other Greeks, particularly the Athenians. The Athenians were fascinated by their polar opposites. They were talkative, democratic, commercial, and naval power. Sparta was a silent, oligarchic, agrarian, and land power. Athens projected all its fears and anxieties onto Sparta. They simultaneously admired Sparta's stability and discipline, especially when their own democracy got messy and were repulsed by its brutality and lack of culture. Writers like Plato and Xenophon often used a highly idealized version of Sparta as a model for their own political philosophies. Later, Roman writers did the same. In this view, the Sparta we know is mostly a reflection of what others wanted it to be, a blank slate onto which they could project their own values. The truth, as is often the case in history, is probably a messy combination of both. The Spartans provided the raw material, a genuinely harsh and unique way of life, and their Greek and Roman observers polished it, exaggerated it, and shaped it into the enduring legend we have today. So as you look back on your life, from the trembling boy in the barracks to the hardened elder in the mess hall, you must see yourself as both a real person and a character in a story. The hunger was real. The pain was real. The sour taste of the broth was real. But the meaning of it all, the story that was woven around your suffering, was a joint creation. It was a legend forged by your leaders, embellished by your enemies, and consumed by future generations who could never truly understand the simple, brutal reality of your dinner. You are an old man now. Your hair is white. Your back is bent. But your eyes still hold the hard glint of a Spartan warrior. You sit in the corner of the mess hall, a silent observer. The room is louder now than it was in your youth. The rules are looser. The young men, their faces soft and their discipline lax, complained openly about the quality of the broth. Some of them have even tasted the sweet, spiced wines of the East, and they find the watered-down vintage of Laconia to be thin and unsatisfying. The system that forged you is crumbling. The great Spartan war machine, once the terror of the Hellenic world, has been defeated and broken by new powers like Thebes. The empire is gone. The wealth that corrupted the state has dried up, leaving behind only the memory of luxury and a lingering discontent. The number of full citizens, the Homo has dwindled to a few hundred. The benches in the mess hall are half empty. The foundations have rotted away. And the great, austere temple of Spartan society is collapsing in on itself. You look down at the bowl of black broth in your trembling hands. It is the one constant in a world of change. It still tastes the same. It still smells of vinegar and duty. For you, this soup is not a symbol of a failed state. It is a portal to the past. In its dark, murky depths, you see the faces of the boys you grew up with in the Agoge, the ones who survived and the ones who didn't. You see the stern, approving gaze of your Irene. You feel the phantom sting of the whip on your back, the gnawing ache of a hunger so profound it became a part of your soul. This food, this terrible, joinous food, was the crucible that shaped every aspect of your being. It taught you that the will is stronger than the body. It taught you to endure, to obey, to place the needs of the collective above the desires of the self. It bonded you to the men at your side with a tie stronger than friendship, a shared experience of suffering. When you stood in the phalanx, shoulder to shoulder with the men from your mess, the shield of your neighbor protecting you, you knew he had eaten the same broth, endured the same training, and learned the same lessons. You could trust him with your life because his entire existence had been a preparation for this moment, just like yours. The philosophers in Athens would argue that this system was a failure. It created men who were brutal, not virtuous. It suppressed the human spirit. It stifled art and science. And it ultimately led to ruin. They would say that a life without pleasure, without beauty, without joy, is not a life worth living. They would look at your bowl of soup and see nothing but barbarism. You see something different. You see the price of security. You see the cost of stability in a dangerous world. For centuries, this system, with its harsh food and its brutal training, kept Sparta safe. It created the most feared army in Greece. It produced men who valued honor above life itself. Was it worth it? You do not know how to answer such a question. It is like asking if a mountain is worth the rock it is made of. It simply is. It was your life. The world has moved on. The future belongs to the smooth-tongued diplomats, the wealthy merchants, the clever generals who fight with mercenaries and new tactics. The age of the Spartan hoplite, the stoic warrior forged in the Agoge, is over. Your way of life is becoming a memory, a story that people will tell their children, a strange, unbelievable tale about a city of madmen who chose hardship over happiness. You take a spoonful of the broth. The sour, familiar taste floods your mouth. It is the taste of your youth, the taste of your strength, the taste of your pride. It is the taste of being a Spartan. And in this collapsing world, it is the one thing that still makes sense. The one thing that is still, and will always be, uniquely yours. You were forged by hardship, and this final, simple meal is a fitting tribute to the man you became. And so, the taste of the broth fades, and the hard benches of the mess hall dissolve into the soft edges of a dream. The stern faces of the warriors soften and blur, their low voices blending with the gentle hum of the fan in your room. The cold, rocky valley of Sparta recedes, replaced by the warmth and comfort of your own bed. You are no longer a soldier in training, no longer bound by the iron laws of Lycurgus. The hunger is gone. The discipline has been dismissed for the night. There are no more tests to pass, no more judgments to endure. You can feel the weight of your own blanket, a luxury a Spartan boy could never imagine. You can hear the quiet sounds of your own time, a world away from the clash of bronze and the sharp commands of the paid Nomos. The story is over. The journey is done. You are safe now, drifting in that peaceful space between wakefulness and sleep. Let the lessons of hardship and endurance float away, leaving only a sense of deep, effortless calm. There is nothing left to do but to let go, to sink deeper into the quiet, and to allow the gentle currents of sleep to carry you away. The night is yours now, a private kingdom of rest and peace. The end of the article. Good night.